that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hey, happy Valentine's Day, everybody. OK, people, good afternoon. It's me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News, and there's a lot to go out this hour. So, foreign aid. Do we owe the world help and money, or should charity start at home? Now, this debate has reared its head again because some politicians are calling for us to stop sending foreign aid to China specifically. We've sent them hundreds of millions over the years. Why? When we have starving people right here. There's also some quite unusual places that we've sent foreign aid, and we can all have a giggle about that in a little bit. One place that we could spend more money is our national defence, our military, because apparently Greece and, unbelievably, Lithuania are spending a higher percentage of GDP on their armed forces than we are, and our Defence Secretary is desperately rattling the can, trying to get £11 billion more in funding. NATO is warning that we don't have enough soldiers and troops, and, of course, our soldiers and troops are also, supposedly, living in terrible conditions. The NHS has started a massive recruitment drive in India. Now, given all the strikes and complaints about the NHS, why anyone would want to come and work in it, I don't know. But should we be training people who are already here? But more than that, and I think this is an interesting angle, is it actually unfair on other countries that we seem to act as some kind of brain drain and we swallow up all the medical professionals who perhaps could make more of a difference in their home country? And yes, of course, as I said, it's Valentine's Day, everybody. Now, is it just a big con to get us all to spend money on chocolates and flowers and pretend to love each other? Or is it a beautiful celebration of human adoration and affection, which can pay you in? Get in touch. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Should we stop sending foreign aid to China? I think that's the one we'll go off today, people. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your latest headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. 2 police officers will face misconduct cases over the handling of Wayne Couzens' admission of indecent exposure. The Independent Office for Police Conduct says the case involves a Met Police constable and a Kent Police sergeant. Former Officer Couzens, who is currently in prison for killing Sarah Everard, has admitted 3 counts of indecent exposure, one of which he committed just 4 days before Miss Everard's murder. The Northern Ireland Assembly has failed to elect a speaker to enable the crisis-hit devolved government to resume business. The DUP again blocked the election of a speaker during a recall sitting this afternoon. The party is protesting at Brexit's Northern Ireland Protocol. Millions of households are facing an increase in their council tax from April. Research by the County Councils Network says 3/4 of councils in England are planning a 5% hike. This is the maximum amount allowed without the need for a local referendum, adding around £100 a year to bills for the average Band D property. Local authorities say they have little choice but to raise the council tax in order to protect services. University staff are staging their first of 3 days of walkouts in an ongoing dispute over pay, pensions and working conditions. Around 70,000 members of the University of College Union are on the picket lines, threatening disruption in 150 universities. Civil servants are also striking this week, including PCS union members at the British Museum, Department for Work and Pensions, DVLA and the Animal and Plant Health Agency. At least 5 survivors have been rescued from the rubble in Turkey today, 8 days after the country's worst earthquake struck, killing more than 37,000 people. Earlier, Syria's president told UN officials he will open 2 more border crossings so emergency aid can enter from neighbouring Turkey. Many Syrians have expressed anger over the lack of aid reaching opposition-controlled areas. The UN says aid deliveries will be allowed through the 2 crossings for an initial 3 months. NATO defence ministers are discussing support for Ukraine in Brussels, including the possible supply of fighter jets to Kyiv. It comes after the alliance warning we are already seeing a fresh Russian offensive in Ukraine, with the Kremlin claiming the NATO is becoming more and more involved in dragging out the conflict. Meanwhile, the government has announced a national 1-minute silence will be held on the 24th of February to mark the first anniversary of the invasion. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says they will do all they can to help the war-torn country.
We need to ensure that Ukraine gets the weapons it needs to be able to retake territory, liberate the lands and win this war and prevail as a sovereign independent nation.
The US military says it has recovered key sensors from the suspected Chinese spy balloon. The balloon was brought down off the coast of South Carolina on the 4th of February. The US Northern Command says the search crews found significant debris from the site, including the priority sensor and electronics pieces. The US has also shot down 3 more objects since then. Beijing denies it was a government spy vessel. Staying in the US now, and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley has announced she is running for president. She'll be challenging her one-time boss, Donald Trump, for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. Nikki Haley was Trump's former United Nations ambassador. For the first time in recent history, the Queen Consort will wear an existing crown at the coronation rather than a newly commissioned piece. Buckingham Palace says Camilla will wear Queen Mary's crown, which has been moved from the Tower of London ahead of the King's coronation in May. The Palace says the decision was made in the interests of sustainability and efficiency. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, now Ben Wallace, he's the Defence Secretary, is attempting to secure between £8 and £11 billion extra in defence spending during the next 2 years to avoid deep cuts to the armed forces. Well, senior Conservative MPs have called on the UK to stop sending foreign aid to China as Western security agencies discuss the threat of suspected spy balloons being used by Beijing and, frankly, quite a lot of other nefarious things taking place. NATO defence ministers, including the Defence Secretary, of course, are in Brussels today to discuss potential surveillance gadgets. Now, it opens up a couple of angles for us, this story, and I'm going to hit them both throughout the course of this show. Is our own defence spending. Do we spend enough, frankly, on defence, and why have we been cutting it? But also our foreign aid obligations. And the emails on this are already flooding in. Any country that has a space programme should not receive money from the UK. That's Nick getting in there early, straight out the traps, Nick. GBviews at gbnews.uk. What do you think about our foreign aid? But earlier today, the US recovered what it described as key Chinese sensors from the first suspected spy balloon. It was shot down 10 days ago off the coast of South Carolina. Since then, a further 3 objects have been brought down across North America. China maintains that the balloon was simply a weather monitoring airship that was blown off course. But, and this is where it gets interesting, OK, the UK sent 50 million quid to the world's second largest economy in 2021 to support development projects. But Development Minister Andrew Mitchell says that no more foreign aid should be sent to China. It's not the only amount of foreign aid that we've sent to China. Actually, we sent them £99 million for a very similar economic development programme just a couple of years ago. Just before I go to my guest on this, I'm going to rattle off a couple of our previous, they're not still happening before everyone gets up in arms about it, previous places that some of your money has been sent. Millions of pounds were sent to a girl band in Ethiopia called Yegna, or the Ethiopian Spice Girls, apparently. Yes, 99 million quid to boost China's economic growth, 300 million pounds for the people of Pakistan. Now, the concern there was that sometimes that money ended up going to people, or groups, I should say, who did not wish us well. I think we should put it that way, did not wish us well. Kenyan rainmakers who watch ants received a cool 25 million quid. And in Nigeria, we did decide to do the right thing and send them 11.3 million quid's worth of solar panels, but then we also funded their oil industry to the tune of 19.5 million. So not great. Anyway, do you think this money should be spent at home? Joining me now is GB News' political reporter, Olivia Rutley. Olivia, yeah, so the foreign aid debate is centred today, anyway, around China. What are the arguments, really, on both sides of this, then?
Well, there are plenty of Conservatives, I'll deal with perhaps the easier side of it first, who think it's sort of patiently absurd that as one of your viewers push it, we're sending foreign aid money to a country which has a space programme. Their argument is essentially that because we've got this this foreign aid spending budget written into law, we end up wasting money because we essentially have a certain amount of money that has to be spent by the end of the year. The Department for International Aid is very careful not to have too many overheads, so they don't have too many people in sort of head office working out how money is spent, which obviously makes quite a lot of sense because you don't want that sort of money to be wasted. On the other hand, it makes it quite difficult to allocate money, so we end up just pushing money towards big European projects, and those European projects might not necessarily have, you know, Britain's best interests or Britain's best foreign policy aims at heart. You know, on the other hand, I mean, there's a sort of general argument that we should be spending this amount that we have written into law on foreign aid every year, and the best way to do that, some would say, is to join up to these big European aid programmes where countries across Europe all contribute to certain packages. And if you're going to do that, then you just can't have too much. You can't be too particular about exactly where your aid money is going. It's all about showing sort of soft power through joining up with other European countries and showing that Europe is prepared to help other nations.
And there is the argument as well. So a lot of people just assume that all of this money goes straight to a particular government, right? And that's not always the case. It can go straight to NGOs, straight to charities, straight to people in some cases. The concern, of course, is that if you're dealing with countries like China, well, realistically, anything that you send over there is probably going to end up being controlled by the state anyway. So that is a concern. Now, supposedly, anyway, the UN obligation is around 0.7%. We've ended up dropping that to about 0.5%. And when it is spoken about as diminishing our standing on the world stage, do you think that's really true? Is that something that someone who is skint here right now should be worried about?
Well, you know, there is an argument that a relatively rich European power like Britain, to show that it is a kind of global power after Brexit, should be being magnanimous about a foreign aid budget. And if, you know, you're looking to put pressure on, for example, other European countries to raise their NATO spending, say, then to show it's good to sort of set an example by having a high foreign aid spending budget. I mean, on the other hand, there is a strong argument which is being put forward now by a lot of backbench Conservative MPs that while people at home are suffering a cost of living crisis, you know, now isn't the moment to be being our most generous, as it were. And we know that during the pandemic, we cut that aid spending back from 0.7% to 0.6%. And there hasn't been a huge cry to push it forward again. So consensus in the country generally seems to be that what we're doing now is probably about right, and getting it back up to where we were before shouldn't really be a priority while we're suffering this crisis domestically.
Thank you very much, Olivia. As always, Olivia Utley there, our political reporter. Just a couple of very, very quick emails on this, because I've been asking you about the foreign aid. So do you think it's important for Britain? Do you think that we shouldn't be sending it to China? Do you think we should be reducing our overall budget? It's the old does charity start at home discussion, isn't it, really? GBViews at gbnews.uk. We should not be handing out any foreign aid to any country, says Phil. It should be kept here to pay for people, to look after people here, basically. That's Phil's view. So joining me now is Labour MP and member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. It's Graham Stringer. Graham, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Let's deal with China first. What could the possible justification for continuing to send money, millions, tens of millions, to China as part of a foreign aid package actually be?
I suppose the argument goes, and I don't agree with it, that there are people in need in China who we can help. You can almost reduce that argument to absurdity if you think there are probably extraordinarily poor people living in the Appalachians in the United States. And can you imagine we would send money to the United States to help very poor people? I think it's a pretty absurd argument. And when you put it into the international context, where China, in a real sense, is at war with most of the democracies in the country. They are stealing our intellectual property. They are undermining us, attacking us, breaking the international regulations on trade. We treat them as a developing country so they don't have to meet net zero objectives. And they're just stealing our industry. So I absolutely don't think we should be sending any money to China. We should be reducing our trade and commitment with China and protecting our own industries against their sabotage.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to agree with you, and I suspect most people are really, because as far as I can tell, that seems to be the common sense and logical approach. Other aspects of foreign aid I find fascinating. There are huge worries from people that some of the foreign aid that we send to certain countries ends up, for example, even in the hands of terror groups and in the hands of people who do not wish us well. How sure can we be when we send money abroad as a nation that it isn't going to people who frankly want to wipe us off the face of the earth?
We can't, because the argument you put at the start of this programme is that if you decide you're going to spend 14 billion a year, which is roughly where it is, every year, then it is easier to give that to other organisations, multilateral organisations, where we lose control of it. I think that's a bad idea. There's a big debate in international aid whether it should be unilateral aid, this country deciding what we support and don't support, or we should give it to major multinational organisations. I'm rather in favour of this country keeping control of that aid. And to pick up the point that was made by one of your viewers, I mean, at the moment, in particular the moment, I think virtually everybody would agree with sending as much humanitarian aid to Syria and Turkey as we possibly can. That's at one extreme. At the other extreme, we absolutely should not be sending money to China or losing control of that money, so it ends up with terrorists.
There is, of course, the argument that everybody, if they so wish, is free to donate off their own back to charity. And a lot of that is what's happening when it comes to the Turkey and Syria earthquake. We've raised millions and millions and millions. I mean, it seems to go up every time I look at it now. It's 30 million quid or something like that, more probably by now. And people have done that off their own back. That wasn't something that the government has just taken out of their pay packets in a roundabout way through taxation. So I suppose there is that argument at the minute. Can I ask you, do you feel as though what we're doing in terms of with the small boats crisis and the amount of money that's costing us in hotels, etc., could we class that as, in a sense, foreign aid? Could that come out of our foreign aid budget?
I think some of it does, and there's been an effort to take that. Personally, I would support that, and to, again, go to the point that was made previously, when we're helping Ukraine, as I think we should help Ukraine, who are under attack from the Russians, then I think that is overseas aid writ large. And I think helping that situation out of the aid budget, it might not fit with what has gone in the past, but it is certainly helping the Ukrainians.
Yes, and indeed it is interesting, actually. I should have said should and not could, because as you've rightly pointed out, so 0.3% of our national income now is going to overseas aid. And the other, well, it's about 0.2% now, isn't it, because we've reduced it, is being spent on things like the small boats crisis, etc. So that is, a chunk of it at least, is coming out of our foreign aid budget, which I think will, I suppose, appease a lot of people. A lot of people would say, well, you know, we shouldn't be particularly doing it. But look, Graham, thank you very, very much. It's great to have you on the show and a good way to kickstart proceedings today. I think Graham Stringer there, who is a Labour MP and member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Look, you had to listen to that now. So, OK, some of our foreign aid budget is actually technically staying at home. I know what you're all going to say about this now, but staying at home as a result of it going to help towards the small boats crisis. So there's a bit of that, all right? So it's not necessarily all additional taxpayers' cash. But there is also, as you heard there from Graham, no, I would argue, massive accountability when it comes to where a lot of this money goes. Does it end up in the hands of people that we wouldn't like it to go to? That's a concern for people. It should be a concern for people. And also, as well, a pretty flat rebuttal there from Graham, wasn't there, about us sending money to China. China, it would appear, do not wish us well. And as he was alluding to there, when it comes to copying various things from us, they are mugging us off, some people would say, and have done for a while. So why pay them for the privilege? Well, let's get the view of what some of you have been actually saying. Joining me now is Sue Cox from Felixstowe and Stephen Hoyles. He joins me from Helensburgh in Scotland. Great to have you both on. Thank you very much. I think, especially as it's Valentine's Day, Sue, we'll start with ladies first. So what do you think about foreign aid, specifically to start with, to China? Your views?
Shall I go?
Yes, Sue, yes.
I absolutely don't. I don't think foreign aid should be given to China. I don't think foreign aid should go to any country that's got a nuclear program, a space program, or a poor humanitarian human rights situation, as in China, where they will chop your head off if you don't toe the party line. I also think, as you have touched on, that China is the second largest economy. It has grown massively over the last 40 years. But they are investing in their own infrastructure, and they have put themselves in a position where the whole world is dependent on them. Not only are they the biggest creditors to many of the poor countries in Africa, and I think they are taking over the world by attrition, particularly with the Belt and Road Initiative.
So I'm going to stop you there just because I'm going to want to come back to you. I don't want to have time. I think you've spoken a heck of a lot of sense there, and it's probably about time you had a show right here on GB News. But, Stephen, no pressure now after that box office barnstorming performance from Sue. But, Stephen, what is your take on nuclear aid to China and more generally? Sorry, foreign aid, not nuclear.
I think, Patrick, that it's absolutely insane, to be honest with you. I mean, we're sending all this money. We've had no idea how it's being spent. And I think backhandedly, it's supporting the Chinese military and their expansion, as Sue said before, into Africa. And we could be using that money better spent at home, or even more immediately in a place like Turkey or Syria, to be honest. So for me, it doesn't make sense. I agree with the previous comments, Graham Stringer. It doesn't make sense to me, the amount of money that's being sent there, I don't think we should be doing it. The foreign aid policy is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just emphasise again that some of this money that we spend is going directly to NGOs. So it's not all going to the government, or different governments, but I do absolutely take your points. And as we've alluded to, let's be honest, if we're sending some money to some of the most corrupt corners of the world, I'm imagining that that's more likely to find itself in the back pockets of various government ministers than it is into needy people's hands. But, Sue, I want to ask you the question now. Where would you rather spend the money in this country? So if we're sending, roughly speaking, something like 14 billion quid abroad as foreign aid, where do you want to see that money spent if you don't want to send it overseas?
I think the greatest need in this country now is our health service, with hundreds of thousands of people waiting for operations, even more now because of the strikes. And, we're talking about a country that we're talking about China, and part of the guise that we're giving money is to help them with their health situation, their national health situation. Well, our national health situation is absolutely dire. I felt a little bit poorly the other day, and I was absolutely petrified because I thought I am not going to be able to speak to a doctor, and to live in a supposedly civilised country when that is how you actually feel.
Sue, I get it. I get it, and I feel for you, and I hope you're feeling better. You certainly look quite bright-eyed and bushy-tailed on this show today, I must say. But I agree with you. I think it's absolutely shocking when we look around at this country and we see things that aren't working, basic infrastructure not working. We see a housing crisis. We see people like yourself who don't particularly... they're worried about whether or not they can get basic health care. But, Stephen, same question to you, mate. Where would you rather see this money spent in this country if we're not sending it abroad?
Two areas I'd like to see it being sent into is education for a start, and secondly to beef up the military. I mean, we've let our armed forces go down far, far too much, and here we are now badly exposed. And if we believe what's being said in NATO, that we can't support some sort of action in the future, then the first objective of a Prime Minister is actually to defend his people. And I think that's one of the areas we should put some more money into. You know, there's a lot gone into the NHS, but I think this time now to seriously look at our military again.
Yeah, I'm again inclined to agree with you. Very sound stuff, that, from you, Sue. Thank you very much. Great to have you both on the show. That's Sue Cox there from Felixstowe and Stephen Hoyles there, joining us from Helmsborough in Scotland. Stephen there touching on something we'll be talking about definitely throughout the show. Yeah, it's the foreign aid stuff, but also the military expenditure. Our Defence Secretary wants another around 11 billion quid spent on it. We've been slashing the military for so long now in terms of troop numbers and arguably as well conditions. Living conditions are shocking for people in some sectors of the military. NATO coming out and saying we might not have the troop numbers, frankly, to be that much of an effective force on the battlefield. Could we even lose our place at the top table? What about the influence there? So there we go. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. And coming up, millions of Brits face a council tax hike, with the majority of England's local authorities saying they'll raise the tax to the max. Taxes to the max, people. I'll be back in a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back, everybody. I don't know what you're paying in council tax, but it always seems like a bit too much, doesn't it? And it never really seems to go down. But supposedly now millions are facing a 5% council tax rise from April as local authorities scramble to balance the books. But I've got some interesting info as to, yes, OK, sometimes what your money is spent on, but also how bad some councils are at actually balancing their books, which does beg the question why we give them more money and trust them with it, but there we go. The County Councils Network has found that 3/4 of councils in England who have social care responsibilities are planning a 5% tax hike, working out to an average of an increase of £100 to Band D properties. council leaders have said they have little choice but to raise taxes. But with many already struggling, many ordinary people already struggling to make ends meet, is this the right time? And to get stuck into the finer points of all of this is Joe Venture, who is Digital Campaign Manager for the Taxpayers Alliance. Joe, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. I am looking at absolute horror stories here, and this is in Berkshire Live, Get Reading. These news outlets, of course, they're saying that places like Slough, for example, which supposedly, anyway, Slough Borough Council to increase council tax by 9.99%, so 10%. I mean, I read with some interest that they've got a 760 million quid borrowing debt. And this is not by any means an incident that's located just around the Slough area. So many councils appear to have been so bad at managing our money for a very long period of time. Do they have a bit of cheek asking us to pay more now?
Well, that's exactly the case, Patrick, and thank you for having me on today. It really is concerning, and I remember when the Chancellor first announced back in November, I believe it was, that the threshold for council tax rises would be increasing to 5%. What we warned at the time is that you will have councils up and down the country will basically use this as a green light to carry on with wasteful spending. Of course, we know councils are currently under pressure, like we all are right now, from inflation and energy prices and all the rest of it. But I think what that move did was it just gave these councils the green light to pass those costs on and pass on the costs of wasteful spending onto taxpayers who are already overburdened, as we know.
Yeah, indeed. And councils, I mean, do they have much accountability? For example, it was Haringey Borough, wasn't it? They spent the best part of 150 grand renaming a road sign from Black Boy Lane to something else. I don't remember what they renamed it, but it didn't matter because someone crossed it out and rewrote the original name. In fact, the original name was kept on it at the bottom. Madness. But is there any accountability? Can anyone go, look, I'm sorry, but you are wasting my money here. I am skint. I can't pay.
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of that, and we as individuals can certainly look at what our councils are spending our money on, and often, quite frankly, we're horrified. But, you would hope that central government would take a role here in protecting taxpayers. But I think their actions have actually indicated quite the opposite. You look at some of the real basket case councils like Croydon, Thurrock, Slough, as you mentioned there, where they've actually been allowed to go beyond even the 5% threshold. And you're looking at, 10%, 15% council tax rises in those areas. And, you're looking at a catalogue of catastrophic spending and management of finances over years and years. And, of course, it just seems now that they're almost being rewarded for failure in a way. The fact that they've managed their finances so badly means that they can raise higher taxes on residents. It's absolutely ludicrous.
Well, you wouldn't run a business like this. And this is what gets me. Politics, one of the big complaints about some, not all, by any stretch of imagination, some people who go into politics is that they've never had a proper job in their lives. Local council areas as well. You wonder if they ran their own business like this, it would have gone bust a long time ago and they would have been sacked. And yet we end up in a situation where now they can come rattling the can and sticking their hand out and voting on big tax increases. Just quickly, in a final one, Joe, if we're looking at the national picture of tax and the local picture of tax, are people being taxed beyond their means? And fundamentally, is that a terrible thing for our economy?
It's an absolutely terrible thing for our economy, Patrick. It's one of the ways that we'll probably find ourselves in a recession soon. We're being taxed now to make a quick buck, to make a quick bit of revenue, and ultimately, in the long term, we're all going to end up paying for it.
OK, Joe, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to talk to you, my good man, Joe Venture there. Digital Campaign Manager for the Taxpayers Alliance. Always worthwhile checking out what the Taxpayers Alliance are doing as well and going online. They do some really good stuff, especially their work around local councils, and you often find out some rather interesting tidbits about your local area as well. So always worth a look. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. The NHS in England is to send a team to India to recruit staff for the health and social care sector. Now, is this the best way to solve the staffing crisis? We need people to work over here, don't we? Nothing against that. But is it actually bad for these foreign countries that we're going over and pinching their best and their brightest? But first, it's your headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 33 minutes past 3. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. 2 police officers will face misconduct cases over the handling of Wayne Couzens' report of indecent exposure. The Independent Office for Police Conduct says the cases involves a Met Police Constable and a Kent Police Sergeant. Former Officer Couzens, who is currently in prison for killing Sarah Everard, has admitted 3 counts of indecent exposure, one of which he committed just 4 days before Miss Everard's murder. The Northern Ireland Assembly has failed to elect a speaker to enable the crisis-hit devolved government to resume business. The DUP again blocked the election of a speaker during a recall sitting this afternoon. The party is protesting Brexit's Northern Ireland Protocol. Detectives looking into the murder of 16-year-old Brianna Jai say they are investigating whether it was a hate crime. Jai, who was a transgender girl, was fatally stabbed in Linear Park in Cheshire last Saturday. A boy and a girl, both aged 15, have been arrested on suspicion of murder. The White House says no group or individual has come forward to claim 3 objects shot down in the United States, but there has been no indication they were part of China's spy program. US military says it has recovered key sensors from the suspected Chinese spy balloon, which was brought down off the coast of South Carolina 10 days ago. It said search crews found significant debris from the site, including the priority sensor and electronic pieces. Beijing denies it was a government spy vessel. Millions of households are facing an increase in their council tax from April. Research by the County Councils Network says 3/4 of councils in England are planning a 5% hike. This is the maximum amount allowed without the need for a local referendum and would add around £100 a year to bills for the average Band D property. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Patrick, he'll be back in a moment.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
OK, loads to come in the next 20 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, so let's rattle through it. I'm going to be talking a bit about UFOs. Now, I don't know if anyone here believes in aliens, but that's right, because we were discussing the mystery of the skies, OK? And that's been taking place in America, unidentified flying objects. I did like the way in our bulletins there, did anyone else look at it? It goes, nobody has come forward to claim these UFOs. They're like it's a lost bag at Paddington Underground or something like that. Of course they're not going to come forward. They're spying on us. Anyway, so a small village in Derbyshire called Bonsall has the dubious reputation of being a so-called UFO hotspot, and there have been claims of around 20 potentially alien aircraft over the years. Our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, joins us now. Thank you very much, Paul. Have you seen any aliens?
No, but
I have spoken to someone who thinks they saw a UFO. It's funny that, isn't it? Yeah, you would have thought that might have made the headlines today if I had indeed seen or even spoken to one. But no, I spoke to a lady who is probably the most notorious UFO sighting in Bonsall, which is one of Britain's hotspots. They've had 19 sightings in the past 20 years or so. But the most famous one, if you go back to 2001, a lady called Sharon Rowlands, she's in her garden with her husband. They decide to test a camcorder, which for those who aren't old enough, it's kind of think of it like an amateur camera that you used to have before smartphones were available. But she's testing it in her garden, and suddenly they see this object in their back, floating over their back garden, because their back garden, as you'll see in this footage we're going to show you, extends out into a valley, beautiful valley in the Derbyshire Dales where we are. She sees this object floating in the sky. It's kind of about the size of a house, cylindrical, there's lights around it, it's rotating, it's moving. She points her camcorder at it, starts moving towards her, and then I asked her, how did she feel as it started to move backwards and forwards towards her?
Frightening. It felt nerving, as if it was watching us instead of us watching that. At one stage we do think it's going to land in the corner. It come in so close, and that was really quite scary. Yes.
And then it just went like that.
It was on a disc, and then it like came over, and then it looked like two engines or whatever it was pulsing. It pulsed and then just went disappeared.
That's it.
Yeah, blinked out.
And to be clear, NASA themselves looked at it and they couldn't tell you what it was.
No. They could tell us what it wasn't, but they couldn't tell us what it was. They said it wasn't a commercial aircraft, it wasn't military aircraft, it wasn't a hot air balloon, it wasn't a weather balloon. What they did say was that it was made of metallic.
And that was it.
OK, Paul, I've got to ask, 2 questions. Does this footage still exist? And do you believe in aliens?
First of all, she said it. She was quite clear. I don't think it's aliens. I just think it's an unidentified flying object. I don't know what I saw, to be honest, but I know I saw it. In terms of the footage, it does exist. One would imagine NASA has a copy somewhere. The other copy is on a disc that she keeps in a vault in Nottingham, and she said no one is having any access to it. In fact, she's very reluctant to talk about this because she knows what she saw, but some people say, look, you're a bit crackers. And she says, look, I'm not crackers. I know what I saw. And I know I've spoken to people, I've worked with people that have seen things in the sky that they can't explain. Perfectly rational people who can't seem to come up with an explanation for what they've seen. And she's one of those people as well. But she's very adamant about what she saw. And it's one of definitely the most famous sighting in Bonsall, and probably one of the most famous sightings in Britain.
Exactly. OK, Paul, thank you very much. Paul Hawkins there, our national reporter, expertly swerving the question as to whether or not he actually believes in aliens there. But there we go. It's not really his job, that, is it, to be asked questions by a numpty like me on national television. But moving on, matters more serious now, people. Matters more serious, because NHS staff are to visit India later this year in the hope of recruiting doctors and nurses for the UK health and social care sector. It comes amidst a staffing crisis in the NHS. In October, a leading social care charity reported the highest rate of vacancies in the sector on record, with around 165,000 unfilled posts. So 165,000 unfilled posts within the NHS, as it were. And clearly the optics of the NHS at the minute are absolutely awful. People are out on strike. Everyone seems to be complaining about it, from the people who work in it to patients themselves as well. Why on earth anyone would want to come here and work in it is beyond me, given what's been going on. But is the NHS right to go abroad to recruit staff? Because there's a couple of points here. Should we be spending recruitment money, as it were, and incentivising people who are already here to try and become workers in our health and social care sector? Is it also unfair on other countries, so less economically developed countries in some cases, not necessarily in the case of India, of course, but it's okay, to go and, like, pinch their best and brightest? Is that a fair thing to do? Could they maybe be more use over there? I don't know. So joining me now is the Executive Chair of the National Care Association. It's Nadra Ahmed, MBE. Nadra, thank you very, very much. Now, I'm going to start with arguably the most basic question first. I understand we're sending people to India to try to, in a way, sell the NHS to them. Given what's going on at the minute and all of the complaints and the optics and people on strike, why would anyone want to come over here and work in the NHS in the health and social care sector?
Well, I think it's one of those things where people just make assumptions that having a role in the UK will be better for them, that they will have better pay and conditions, and that they will progress in their particular careers much better if they've worked in a NHS setting. So it's a perception that it's better for them.
I've got to ask, Nadja, is that true? Because if it's not true, then I suppose essentially we're lying to people to try to get them over here. If it is true, what are so many people complaining about?
Well, I think what we've got to think about is where people are being recruited from, where we are seen as a country where we've got a very good NHS research, all sorts of things. The reality is that it's the workforce challenge that we've never tackled, and the warnings have been there for many, many years. So as the workforce has shrunk, the work methodology and process has become much more difficult. So for somebody who's coming across, they may not well know that. I don't think that we're lying to them. I think we are seen as a really good system. Sadly, what I think is happening is the system is creaking, and it's creaking really badly.
Can I just ask, why are we having to go to India? Why can't we get people who are already here and maybe incentivise them? I've got no problem. I mean, by the way, if I was having a heart attack, I wouldn't care which part of the world anyone was from who was treating me. But I just don't understand why we haven't got people here that want to fill these jobs.
Well, I think there's a couple of answers to that question. And I think, firstly, we've got to acknowledge that we've always had within the NHS people who come across from abroad to work in our services. So I think that is something that's nothing new. But I think your wider question is really important, and that is that this has got to be a short-term solution. If we are doing that and we are going out that, and on top of the numbers of the NHS vacancies, we've got 165,000 in social care. So we are in a very challenging situation, but it's got to be a short-term solution. We've got to find the long-term solution for this, and that has to be a domestic workforce which is valued and rewarded properly, so that we don't have to rely on friends and colleagues from other countries to come across.
I do find it quite interesting that there are people working in the NHS who really do think that it's completely broken, that it's awful, and staff are treated horribly, patient care is a shocker as well, and yet are also willing to go abroad and presumably tell people that they can have a great time working in our NHS. Is it fair to go to countries like India? India might be a bad example because they have got quite a good economy, OK? I know there's massive poverty in India, but in the grand scheme of things, India's economy is pretty good, right? But other countries, other less economically developed countries, is it right that we are so welcoming to some of their top brass in terms of their medical profession? Would they not be better served in their own country? Are we brain draining the world, is what I'm getting at?
Well, I think it's a difficult question because they wouldn't come if they didn't want to come. So there is something that's drawing them to come and work in the NHS. And as for our own NHS, I think the reason that people are so drained and so exhausted, and this is true of the social care sector as well, is because we don't have the workforce, and we've not invested in making sure that we can keep the doctors. We've been very, very, very driven by management. Managing the NHS has been the big thing. I think that's made it very difficult.
Yeah, just quickly, actually, very quickly, sorry, but I just want to put to you something one of my producers actually mentioned earlier, which is when we do bring people over, let's say we get, I'm just picking a number out of the sky, let's say we get 10,000 people from India, OK? We have to then find them somewhere to live, we have to maybe do some additional training, etc. And there is that added burden to it as well. And presumably, as you've just said, it would really be the best thing for everyone all round if we could get people who were already here, because then we wouldn't have to find additional accommodation for them all.
Absolutely. I don't think it's a burden. I think it's a responsibility. If you bring people across, then you are going to have to look after them, give them the pastoral care, make sure that they have that sort of cultural grounding of the difference in the work. Okay. Absolutely. But I will stick by my point, which is that we have to invest in a domestic workforce, and that's by improving the image and the pay of the people who are doing the job.
Yeah, the image, well, the pay, of course, is important. The image, especially at the moment, is absolutely through the floor. Nadra, thank you very much. Nadra Ahmed, MBE, there, who's the Executive Chair of the National Care Association. What do you make of that? Ladies and gentlemen, we obviously need to fill vacancies, don't we? Is that the right way to go about it? GB News contacted Health Education England, and they said to us, we continue to work on developing relationships in India for doctors, nurses and other health professionals as part of our mandate to support the growth of the NHS workforce. The purpose is to support a new ethical pathway for international healthcare staff to come into the West Yorkshire area and to help increase staff numbers. Right, OK, so that is basically that. Look, loads of you have been getting in touch on the emails as well, by the way, about foreign aid. I've not forgotten about you. I'm going to the emails shortly. In light of the fact that there are calls now to stop sending foreign aid to China, we sent them at least 50 million quid in the last couple of years. A lot of you now are up in arms saying we need to stop that, but we also should start charity at home and stop sending billions, and it's around 14 or 15 billion quid to various different places around the world. And in the past, we've sent them for some quite comical things, including some Ethiopian girl band called Yagna, known as the Ethiopian Spice Girls. They received a few £1 million of your quid too. I mean, do we all remember their last album? No, me neither. Anyway, we're going to be returning to the inbox shortly because I want your views on that. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But matters closer to home. The King has formally launched a temporary Syrian community tent in Trafalgar Square, where members of the Syrian community can gather to support those affected by the recent earthquakes. He's also been meeting some of the Turkish diaspora in this country. They've been organising getting food, clothes and blankets out to Turkey. Let's cross now to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker. Cameron is there. What's going on?
Hi, Patrick. Yes, I'm told it's very much engagements that the King wanted to squeeze into his very busy diary, supporting those communities in Turkey and Syria affected by the earthquake. So just take a look at this tent here in Trafalgar Square. This is, as you said, Syria's House, temporary Syrian community tent for people to get together to support those affected by the recent earthquake. And the King was formally opening it here today. It's supporting those in Britain who's been collecting money and clothes and blankets and warm clothing for those affected by the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, because let's not forget, it's two countries who have been affected. And earlier today, he's here for Syria and Trafalgar Square, but earlier today he was in Hounslow meeting volunteers who are collecting food, warm clothing and blankets in particular for people in Turkey affected by the earthquake. Of course, 35,000 people, more than 35,000 people are confirmed to have died in that earthquake, and it is something that has become quite personal, I think, to King Charles and Queen Camilla, because they have made a personal donation to the Disasters Emergency Committee, as have actually the Prince and Princess of Wales. Now, we don't know the exact number of pounds that the royal family have donated to this Disasters Emergency Committee. However, we do know that the amount raised in total so far by everybody equates to more than £60 million. Now, as we know, the Queen Consort has been diagnosed with COVID-19. She's tested positive for COVID-19, so she's had to cancel all her engagements this week. We do now know that she will be wearing Queen Mary's crown at the coronation on May the 6th. The King so far appears to be in good spirits and isn't affected too badly or too concerned about the Queen Consort's health. And no doubt all eyes are on the King to see if he is well enough and does not test positive himself for his planned engagement in Milton Keynes on Thursday, celebrating the fact that it has got city status.
Royal reporter from Trafalgar Square, and fantastic. That's around £60 million already being raised. It does do somewhat, I think, to dispel the notion that Britain is not a particularly charitable country, that the average man and woman on the street does not care about people in other countries. But it does also beg the question, and it leads us almost seamlessly on now to our big question today, which is about foreign aid. Now, there have been calls for us to stop sending foreign aid to China for the obvious reasons. A, they're quite wealthy, to say the least. They've got a space programme, and they don't necessarily mean as well in light of all the spy balloon stuff. Why are we sending them the money? Lots of you have been getting in touch with this And I'm going to go down to Lee from Hastings, who says, why are we not stopping all money to foreign countries completely? Especially whilst we have so many issues at home. It's time to stop propping other countries up whilst our own citizens are suffering. Look, Lee, I think a lot of people would agree with you, and some of the places that we've sent money has been absolutely ridiculous. An argument against that, I'm not saying I agree with it, but an argument against it is if you don't send money to some countries, then some things basically become our problem down the line, don't they? But we can argue what's going on in the Channel, that the ship has quite literally sailed on that one. Jim says, it's not as black and white as that. Few things really are, Jim, to be fair, but our foreign aid goes a long way for people in poorer nations, even in China. Without us, they will suffer. I get what you're saying. Now, I think China is a bad example of foreign aid because I refuse to believe that even if we send money to places like non-governmental organisations, charities on the ground, ordinary people in China, that the government, the Chinese state, will not have control of that. So I do think that realistically there's not much point sending foreign aid to China. I would be very, very doubtful about it all going to the right places. Now, we're moving on. If you hadn't already noticed, the displays of red and pink balloons and roses in shop windows, today is, of course, Valentine's Day, and this might have struck dread into your heart, but don't worry, as speed dating could help you to find a last-minute match. It's become increasingly popular for those suffering with dating fatigue, being offered as a fun and fast way to meet potential partners. Well, I wanted to speak to a man who's involved with organising these events and a self-proclaimed dating guru. It's Rob Ryle, who is the Managing Director of speed dating service, Dating a Dash. Look, Rob, I've got to ask, have you got a partner?
I do. I'm happily married, yes.
You see, you're an advert. You are a personal advert. I think if you were twice divorced and bitter and alone on Valentine's Day, people might have some concern about the kind of service you were providing. But so what goes on? I must say, I've not been speed dating. What happens?
So we've been doing it for about 12 years now. You get about 40 people will turn up to a bar every night of the week. I do the events, and you'll go on about 20 dates for 3 to 4 minutes. All different age groups attend, and it's just a great way to meet lots of people in one evening. It saves the time spent on online dating and dating apps, the finger fatigue people have now. There's too much choice with the dating apps. Come to one of my events. It's a safe, secure environment, and it's also a good night out. It's just a bit of fun, really. You can bring some friends with you, have a few drinks, and you never know who you're going to meet. We've had 4 weddings since we started the business 12 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And so how good is it in terms of long-term relationships then?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty hard to say. People don't always give me the positive feedback. But I know of lots of people that have found love through Dating a Dash and through the events that we do. So we've had 4 weddings, lots of positive feedback. We've had 60,000 people through the doors since we launched back in 2011. And, people enjoy it. Since the pandemic and COVID and being locked down, it's now as popular as it's ever been. People just want to get out the house and meet in person.
Part of me wonders whether or not this is a great thing and you really are selling it to me, but how does it work at the end of it? So do you end up being ranked by a load of strangers on a piece of paper? Because I can imagine that being quite brutal, especially if you look like me.
Patrick, you'd be fine, trust me. No, it's not like that, This is like a speed date in a way, isn't it, between me and you? But, I mean, it's not like that. We have an option for friend as well, so you will tick yes, no, or friend. So there's a gentle letdown there at the end. So a lot of people come to my events and they will go away with some new girlfriends or guy friends if they don't find the one that evening.
Mate, honestly, I think it's a fantastic idea, and it's Dating a Dash, is that right? And presumably people can check that out online and yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Datingadash.com. It's Valentine's Day today. Unfortunately, all our events this evening are sold out, but we've got lots happening, including a massive party on Friday.
Oh, OK. All right, Rob, thank you very much. Rob Ryle there, Managing Director of Dating a Dash. It's Valentine's Day, people. Why not get yourself out on a series of dates, not just one? You can date in a dash. Anyway, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, more on those suspected Chinese spy balloons, prompting the question, should we continue to send millions in foreign aid to China, or indeed anywhere else? For that matter, stay tuned.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 4 o'clock. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News. Coming up this hour, where do you stand on foreign aid? Money well spent, or could we be using it for projects here? Should charity start at home? That's why I'm asking today. And of course, it's a debate that politicians are having. It's been reignited by the fact that some people think we should stop sending foreign aid to China because, well, they're quite wealthy and don't necessarily mean us that well, do they? So we've sent them hundreds of millions of pounds. Should that stop at least? Anyway, couldn't we be using that money a lot more wisely? Apparently, Greece and Lithuania, get this, they're spending a higher percentage of their GDP on their armed forces than we are. Our Defence Secretary is desperately trying to claw an extra £11 billion more in funding. NATO is warning that we don't have enough soldiers, and troops, apparently, are living in terrible conditions. Do we really have to rely on foreign workers to save our health service from collapse? Apparently so, because the NHS has started a recruitment drive in India. What could we be doing to try to entice more people who are already here to work in our NHS? Or, actually, is it all a rather nice thing? I would argue that it might not be a good thing for some of these countries because we're taking their best talent, aren't we? And actually, is that quite unfair on them? And love is in the air, apparently. Yes, it's Valentine's Day. Is it just a big con to get us all to spend money on chocolates, flowers and pretend to love each other? Or is it a beautiful celebration of human adoration and bliss? Anyway, get in touch with me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. It's going to be about foreign aid today from you. Should we be sending foreign aid to China? And where would you like our foreign aid budget to be spent if it stays here in the UK? gbviews@gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you and good afternoon to you. Our top story on GB News today. 2 police officers will face misconduct cases over the handling of former Met Police officer Wayne Couzens' report of indecent exposure. The Independent Office for Police Conduct says the case involves a Met Police constable and a Kent Police sergeant. Couzens is currently in prison for the murder of Sarah Everard and has admitted 3 counts of indecent exposure, one episode of which he committed just 4 days before the murder of Sarah Everard. Now, in other news today, the Northern Ireland Assembly has failed to elect a speaker to enable the crisis-hit devolved government to resume its business. The DUP has vetoed the election during a recall sitting this afternoon, meaning no further business can be conducted. It's demanding decisive action on removing economic barriers on trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Negotiations, meanwhile, between the UK and the EU to resolve differences over the protocol are continuing. Millions of households are facing an increase in their council tax from April. Research by the County Councils Network says 3/4 of councils in England are planning a 5% hike. That's the maximum allowed without the need for a local referendum, adding around £100 a year to bills for average Band D properties. Local authorities say they have little choice but to raise the council tax in order to protect local services. University staff are staging their first of 3 days of walkouts in an ongoing dispute over pay, pensions and conditions. Around 70,000 members of the University of College Union are on the picket lines, threatening disruption in 150 universities. Civil servants are also striking this week, including the PCS union at the British Museum and the Department for Work and Pensions, the DVLA and the Animal and Plant Health Agency. Overseas news now, and UK charities and organisations are to send emergency supplies worth more than £350,000 to Turkey 8 days after devastating earthquakes struck there and in Syria. At least 6 survivors have been rescued from the rubble in Turkey today, as the number of people that have died in the disaster passes 37,000. Earlier, Syria's president told the UN he'll open 2 more border crossings so emergency aid can enter from neighbouring Turkey for an initial 3-month period. Many Syrians have meanwhile expressed their anger over the lack of aid reaching opposition-controlled areas, and the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called man-made obstacles should be removed.
And I have an urgent message to the international community. The human suffering from this epic natural disaster should not be made even worse by man-made obstacles. Access, funding, supplies. Aid must get through from all sides to all sides through all routes without any restrictions.
NATO defence ministers are discussing support for Ukraine in Brussels, including the possible supply of fighter jets to Kyiv. That comes after the alliance warned we're already seeing a fresh Russian offensive in Ukraine, with the Kremlin claiming NATO's becoming more and more involved in dragging out the conflict. Meanwhile, the government here has announced a national 1-minute silence to be held on the 24th of February to mark the first anniversary of the invasion. And the NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said they'll do all they can to help the war-torn country.
We need to ensure that Ukraine gets the weapons it needs to be able to retake territory, liberate the lands and win this war and prevail as a sovereign independent nation.
Now, the White House has said no group, organisation or individual has come forward to claim 3 objects shot down over the United States, but it said there's no indication at this stage they're part of China's spy programme. The US military has said it's recovered key sensors as well as significant debris, as it puts it, from the sites of the suspected Chinese spy balloon. Beijing has denied the balloon, which was brought down off the coast of South Carolina 10 days ago, was a government spy vessel. Now, detectives looking into the murder of Brianna Gay say they're investigating whether or not it was a hate crime. The 16-year-old, who was a transgender girl, was fatally stabbed in Linear Park in Culcheth in Cheshire near Warrington last Saturday. A boy and a girl, both aged 15, have been arrested on suspicion of murder. Police have been granted an extra 30 hours to question them both. For the first time in recent history, the Queen Consort will wear an existing crown at the coronation rather than a newly commissioned piece. Buckingham Palace says Camilla will wear Queen Mary's crown, which has been moved now from the Tower of London ahead of the King's coronation in May. The palace says the decision was made in the interests of sustainability and efficiency. You're up to date. I'm back in an hour. See you then.
OK, all right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. OK, so 2 big ones, really, all rolled into one. We've got our defence spending, or lack of, and has that left us vulnerable? We're also, of course, going to be talking about foreign aid in light of the fact that there are calls now for us to stop sending tens of millions of pounds. If you add it up over the course of the years, obviously it racks up into the hundreds of millions, doesn't it, to China, other nations as well. Starting with this, Lord Darroch has claimed that while the UK has underinvested in defence, we still have capacity to deal with surveillance inflatables sent to Britain, i.e. we can shoot down a Chinese weather balloon. Well, I'd hope so, wouldn't you, frankly? It's a balloon. I would like to think that we haven't sent absolutely everything to Ukraine yet and we can maybe shoot down something of ourselves. It comes amid a diplomatic spat between China and the US. So 4 suspected spy balloons were shot down over North America. Senior Conservative MPs are now calling on the UK to stop sending foreign aid to the country. We sent China £50 million, which is the world's second largest economy, China. That was just in 2021 to support development projects. If I go back to a little list that I compiled earlier on as well, you might find it quite funny, frankly, to see some of the areas that we have sent money to in the past. We decided that it was a good idea, it was a good use of your money, of my money, of everyone's we know is money, to send Kenyan rainmakers who watch ants and try to predict the weather, £25 million. That was a few years ago. £95 million to India, despite, of course, them having a £100 million moon landing programme. And this is a good one as well. In Nigeria, we sent 11.3 million quid's worth of solar panels, OK? We also funded their oil industry to the tune of 19.5 million, so that kind of cancelled it out. And as regular viewers to this show will know, every time the foreign aid debate comes up, I have to mention the Ethiopian Spice Girls, who we sent a few million quid to try to boost the musical development of Ethiopia. How does that make you feel when you're struggling to put the heating on at the moment, or your council tax is going up by, in the case of the poor people of Slough, 9.99%. Joining me now is GBNews' political reporter Olivia Rutley. Olivia, thank you very much. Great to have you back on the show. So, the discussion at the minute is centred around China. This is from our politicians. We are broadening it out here on GB News. But they are saying enough is enough when it comes to foreign aid to China. Is that right?
Yes, well, actually, the government has already said that it's going to phase out spending to Beijing. That promise was made a few years ago. And yet, as you said in your introduction there, last year, 50 million was spent on foreign aid spending, bilateral foreign aid spending, that is Britain to China. That put it just outside the top 20 countries that Britain sent aid to. So it really is a pretty astonishing figure. The other quite astonishing figure is that we've sent money to 57 separate causes in China. So that's a lot of money washing around. And the argument for it is that lots of this aid spending is on climate change projects. And of course, without China making a huge difference to its carbon output, then what we're doing is really a drop in the ocean. So there is obviously a good argument for putting a lot of soft power, putting a lot of pressure on China to reduce its carbon footprint. The other argument, of course, is that although, as you say, China itself is a rich country, GDP is high, poverty in China is quite high too, because that money isn't evenly distributed. Although the comeback to that is that the problem is that you've got a government there. Exactly. We know that there are serious problems with the CCP. So is it sensible to be sending aid money to any sort of public sector organisation with that sort of a government in charge? And this is kind of rumbled up at the moment because we knew already that there was an argument going on the Conservative backbenches over whether Rishi Sunak has been too soft on China. Liz Truss, when she was running to be Prime Minister, called China the biggest threat in a generation. Yes. Rishi Sunak didn't go that far, and there were lots of China hawks in the party, Ian Duncan-Smith, namely, Simon Clarke too, pushing huge amounts of pressure on Rishi Sunak to do the same thing. So it feels like there are all sorts of issues kind of bubbling up at the same time and putting pressure on Rishi Sunak from all different angles. Yeah, I've got a list here. Now, this is from 2021, ladies and gentlemen, OK? So the 10 biggest recipients of UK bilateral overseas development aid, so foreign aid, OK? 1, Afghanistan, £187 million. Nigeria, £140 million. Pakistan, £128 million. We've got Ethiopia, Yemen, South Africa, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, and Syria just brings in the top 10, ladies and gents, with a cool 91 million quid. Certainly, in the top one there, Afghanistan, that stands out like a sore thumb. It at least gives the impression, doesn't it, Olivia, that I suppose the Taliban are taking it home in wheelbarrows. Well, that, of course, is the danger. I mean, it's a very tricky balance to strike, and we know that politicians are really struggling with this because, on the one hand, obviously, there are people in Afghanistan who are massively struggling as a result of the Taliban takeover, and you've got women unable to go to university, people plunged into really serious poverty. So not sending aid could be seen as sort of callous and not doing our international duty. On the other hand, as you put it, you could end up in a situation where the Taliban's taking it home in wheelbarrows. So how you get that aid distributed fairly in countries is a big problem, and one that Conservative MPs have argued that we're not putting enough effort into. We have this amount of money written into our law. We've got to spend 0.6% of our GDP on aid, but how that aid is distributed, we sort of can sometimes shrug our shoulders and let it go.
One thing that I think will be of interest to people, we talk a lot here at GB News about the channel migrant crisis and about the fact that we're paying to put people up in hotels and all of the additional costs that go into all of that as well. Now, apparently, billions more spent in the UK, i.e. on things like the small boats crisis, will count as foreign aid. So when we really rack up supposedly the 0.5% roughly of our GDP that we are bracketing as foreign aid, only 0.3% of that will actually technically go abroad. Now, I wonder whether or not that changes the game for people. Do they feel better about the fact that it's not additional taxpayers' money that's going, in every single sense anyway, to helping with the small boats crisis? But, Olivia, some would say this is quite an easy political win, especially for the Conservative Party, if they want to rally up their base to say, OK, look, I understand now, Marjorie from Slough, your council tax has gone up 9.99%. You are concerned that you've got 2 asylum seeker hotels in your area. You can't get a GP's appointment. The trains are always on strike. I tell you what, Marjorie, we're going to slash foreign aid. We're going to not send any money abroad and we're going to keep it all here. It would at least sound and look good, wouldn't it?
It might sound and look good. The issue is that it would probably be very difficult to get it through Parliament. We know that there have been attempts to do things like that before, and with quite left-wing on the whole House of Lords, there's some problems there. Also can be problems getting it through the courts at a later stage too. So what Rishi Sunak is doing here, which is probably quite clever, is essentially redefining what we call foreign aid and doing, as you say, using some of that money to deal with the channel migrants problem. He also said, when he was Chancellor during the pandemic, he changed that. The commitment was 0.7% of GDP to be spent on foreign aid. He's already watered that down. So instead of doing what you say and sort of making a bold statement about slashing foreign aid, he's playing a slower game, really, with this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Olivia, thank you very, very much. As always, Olivia Rutley, our political reporter. Yeah, so I just rattled off a couple of things, didn't I, about where some of your money is going to as a result of foreign aid. It will undoubtedly go to some incredibly good causes. And when we look at some really, really dodgy parts of the world that this goes to, people should be slightly reassured. Now, not all of that in every country goes directly to the government. Far from it. There are various different aid bodies, international groups, NGOs that work in the most far-flung corners of the world, and we do send money directly to them. So it's not like every single penny of your money goes straight into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party or anything like that. No, but still, some of it does. And rather concerningly, in some parts of the world, so Afghanistan is the obvious example, which is clearly some of that money is going to places, people like the Taliban, but also as well, countries like Pakistan, unfortunately, in some of those groups where the money goes to there, it can find its way, and indeed reportedly, quite extensively reportedly, has found its way into the hands of groups, again, who do not wish us particularly well over here. And that, to me, seems a bit weird, doesn't it? Instead of just spending that money at all costs, billions and billions of pounds, we've got a budget to hit here, when we have thousands of children waking up homeless on Christmas morning, when we have military veterans who are lining the streets, when we have nurses, etc., who want a pay rise and all of this stuff, actually, is it quite hard to justify sending, what was it, 187 million pounds to Afghanistan when we also have Afghan refugees over here? What do you think? What do you think? gbviews at gbnews.uk. Lots of you have been getting in touch. Andy says, why do we continue to send foreign aid to countries who spend vast amounts of money on nuclear weapons and space programmes? We should keep the money at home. Yes, if I identified another key issue there, if you're planning on going to the moon, in my book, you probably shouldn't be taking any foreign aid from us, and I think that's a bit cheeky. Could you not be spending some of that money on your own citizens? And people will say, well, it's all about soft power. OK, fine, but what are the countries we're trying to curry soft power with? In the case of, for example, China, how's that working out for us? They'll just nick all our technology and try to turn it against us, won't they? So we've got Susan now from Carmarthenshire. Politicians need to be reminded that they are there to make our lives better. There's far too much money leaving our shores while the country is in decline. And I am very worried, Susan, about the notion, anyway, that we seem to have money for everybody else. We seem to have money for huge amounts of relief funds. I'm not saying we shouldn't, by the way. Absolutely not. Just look at what's going on in Turkey and Syria now with these earthquakes. Absolutely, the British public has put their hand in their pocket. The government is matching funding up to a certain point. The last time I checked, our total raise was around 60 million quid. Very, very generous. A cause I think we can all agree money should be sent to. But then when you think about other little foreign aid projects, like, for example, I mentioned there the Nigerian rainmakers that apparently received a couple of million quid back in the day, you think, well, why have we got money for everyone else and not people who are struggling here right now? Why are we being told, oh, sorry, you're skint, or your disability allowance is being cut, for example, or we haven't got enough money to go and get people a GP appointment? And people are in decline. Britain is, as you say, Susan, in decline, unfortunately, and yet we still want to prop up other corners of the world. Look, there are very much two sides to this. The soft power argument is a compelling one, and as we've already seen, China is stepping in to help fund various African nations, and that gives them a huge amount of power. That could be us. It's a mixed bag. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Keep them all coming in. Now, local councils have announced a big tax increase for millions, and that's from April, as they aim to raise revenue to tackle the rising cost of social care. So here we go again, people. Councils across England have announced large tax increases, with 3/4 of councils who have social care duties planning a 5% hike. Some councils, it's just under 10%. Whilst the government has said that councils should consider money pressure on residents, local authorities cite the state of the economy as why they have no choice but to put up rates. But again, it's fascinating because you look at some councils are billions of pounds in debt, some to the tune of hundreds of millions as well. They've not been managing our money well, have they? I think we have a right, don't we, to say, well, OK, 5% extra, I can't really put the heating on at the minute, or I am having to cancel various different amenities or shop at different shops and all of that stuff. Where is this money going? Because you haven't been managing it that well. Joining me now is Robert Palmer, Director of Tax Justice UK. Robert, thank you very, very much. Look, some councils have had an absolute shocker with our finances, including taking out borrowing huge amounts of money and then not accounting for inflation and interest rates rises as well. Why on earth should the British public, the ordinary man and woman out there on the street, give them any more money?
I mean, it's a really good question. And we've got a challenge that we can see. You know, lots of people will be frustrated with the services they get from their local councils. And the answer is that councils' budgets have been really squeezed over the last 10, 15 years. And so they're trying to do the same amount of work with less money. And also a lot of the money that councils get from council tax goes into things like social care, which obviously some really vulnerable people, you know, elderly people, vulnerable adults, children really need that support, but perhaps the ordinary day-to-day taxpayer doesn't see it. And I think one of the other things that really gets me about council tax is the way it currently works is that if you're poorer, you pay more of your income in council tax than if you're rich. So there'll be people in mansions in Westminster that will be paying lower council tax rates than people in the north.
Yeah, but just to counter that is that those people who live in those mansions will be paying a lot more in tax, won't they? So they will be paying, in many cases, I would imagine, close to 50% of every single thing that they earn will go to the taxman. And so do you want them to pay even more in council tax as well?
I think it depends. You know, there are some rich people out there who pay lots and lots of tax. You know, if you're taking your income through your payslip, if you're part of the PAYE public, you're going to be paying lots of tax. But there are also lots of rich people who can use different schemes and parts of the tax system to pay lower tax bills. I think we do have this fundamental problem. And I think you pointed out before that every year councils increase the council tax, and it really hits people, particularly those who are struggling with the cost of living crisis. And at the same time, services are really not great. You know, you talked about bad management of resources, and part of that is because some councils are so desperate to bring in money that they've ended up diversifying and ended up being property developers, which is probably not where we want our local councillors to be.
I mean, I'm reading local reports. I've spoken about this before on air, but Woking Council, £1.7 billion in debt, according to reports, and it joins places like Croydon, Thurrock and the aforementioned Slough as being particularly debt-riddled, right? And I just don't feel as though there's enough local accountability for this. Unquestionably, I get that, yes, OK, local council budgets have been cut. People don't like to talk about the fact that the population is, of course, increasing at a rapid rate as well, which isn't helping because it's more for people to pay for. It is also, should be anyway, more of a source to raise money, which does beg the question exactly who is paying council tax, but there we go. But if any member of, let's say, Woking, Croydon, Thurrock or Slough Council ran a business the way that they have run their local council's finances, they would be sacked, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point. We should demand that our politicians use our money and use public money properly, and it's really important that's done, because councils provide services that we all rely on. So you're definitely right that there are some councils who there are some big questions to answer about how they've been behaving. But I do think there's this problem that councils are being asked to do more with less money. We've got an aging population. That means more money on social care. And so I think we need to rethink the way in which we're funding some of the services that councils provide, because I just don't think it's sustainable for council tax to keep going up and up and up, particularly when it hits the poorest the hardest.
OK, thank you very, very much, Robert. Always enjoy our chats. Robert Palmer there, Director of Tax Justice UK. I mean, are you struggling at the minute? Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I know the fact is the vast majority of people are struggling quite a bit at the minute. And the idea that council tax is going up. And the thing is, I would be more inclined to have more sympathy for local councils if it wasn't for the fact that council tax, as long as I've been alive, appears to have pretty much always gone up. Pretty much. That's certainly the way I remember it. Years back, reporting at local newspapers, etc., you'd always go to your local council meeting. People would be, oh, sorry, we're skipped. That's the terrible economic climate. Oh, we're having to pay for this, that and the other. So I don't buy it that it's just this current economic climate. And if it was just this current economic climate, I would beg the question why places like Woking Borough Council have managed to get themselves into £1.7 billion worth of debt. But there we go. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, the King. He's been out and about again, hasn't he? Meeting members of the Turkish and Syrian communities here in the UK to help raise money for the relief effort. I've got all of that coming your way and much, much more. I'll be back in a tick.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
King Charles has been out and about today meeting some of the Turkish and Syrian communities in this country as they seek to organise efforts to help those affected by the recent earthquakes. This afternoon, he's formally launched a temporary Syrian community tent in Trafalgar Square where the diaspora can gather. Let's cross over now to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker. Cameron, thank you very much. So what's going on then? The King's out and about.
Hi, Patrick. Yes, he has. In fact, he's created time in his very busy schedule to make sure he supports both the Syrian and Turkish communities here in the United Kingdom who are raising money for their relatives and friends back in their home countries affected by this terrible earthquake, which has killed so far at least 35,000 people. Now, take a look at this tent in the middle of Trafalgar Square here, which has many crowds around it, actually, for those listening on radio, and it's called Syria's House, a temporary Syrian community tent for people to get together to support the Syrian community. But of course, there are two countries affected by this earthquake. So the king was here in Trafalgar Square visiting the Syrian community here. He formally opened this tent as it raises money. But earlier today, he was in Hounslow meeting volunteers there who are collecting food, collecting blankets, warm clothing to then ship across to Turkey to then aid the people in Turkey who have been affected by this earthquake. As I said, it's caused widespread damage in those two countries over there, but I think it's something very personal to the king. I'm told he wanted to create time in his very busy schedule to visit and to support these communities. We also know that the king and the Queen Consort have made a personal donation to the Disasters Emergency Committee. We don't know the exact amount of money, but we do know that the Prince and Princess of Wales has also donated to that appeal, and the total raised by everybody equates to more than £60 million. Now, the Queen Consort has tested positive for coronavirus, but the King was clearly not that concerned because he was still out and about carrying on with his constitutional duties as King, visiting local communities. But the Queen Consort has had to cancel all her engagements this week. But today we did find out that she's going to be wearing Queen Mary's crown at the coronation, which avoids the controversial diamonds, the Koh-i-Noor, which is currently in Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's crown, which we will not see at the coronation on May the 6th. But all eyes are on the King because we've seen him stay in Trafalgar Square, and questions now being raised if we are, in fact, still going to see him as planned in Milton Keynes on Thursday, because he is meant to celebrate that city, marking the fact that Milton Keynes is now having city status. The Queen Consort was meant to accompanying him, but now she has COVID, so she is not. And let's hope the King does not test positive himself for COVID-19 and does make that engagement on Thursday.
Well, yes, indeed. Cameron, thank you very much. Cameron Walker, there, our royal reporter in Trafalgar Square for you. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with us and your thoughts on the NHS staff planning a trip to India in a bid to help recruit carers amid a staffing crisis. So we have a load of staff shortages in the NHS, specifically when it comes to our social care sector, around 160,000 vacancies. And we're clearly struggling to fill those with people who are already here, right? And I'm not surprised either. I don't know about you, but I get that people want a pay rise and I get that people are saying that conditions are awful. But can you imagine trying to entice people in and saying, we need more staff? Well, who on earth would want to come and work in our NHS at the minute if they keep being told how absolutely awful it is and that it's terrible? Well, supposedly, and I heard an interesting argument with a lady earlier on who works in the NHS, and she was saying, well, actually, a lot of people from other countries do find our NHS quite desirable. And I find those two things slightly self-defeating, don't they? Either our NHS is shocking and it is a terrible stain on the Britain reputation worldwide, or it's good and people from other countries want to come and work here. So John says, we should be more focused on training up homegrown talent. There are similar systems already in place who recruit foreign workers. Not only do they need to be trained, but they also need to be housed and looked after, which becomes very costly. And it's interesting, isn't it, in that sense, because we would obviously have to house people and train people to want to come over here and work in our NHS. And does that add to a housing crisis, etc.? James says, I am actively recruiting from overseas for the care industry in the UK. Oh, here we go. I have 24 vacancies per month, but people in the UK are reluctant to work. There seems to be far too many handouts, hence why our recruiters are going overseas. Well, that's a really interesting point. Later on, actually, I'm going to be talking to somebody who does work in the care sector, and I think James has quite a similar view to you. But what could we be doing more as a country? Firstly, actually, does it matter, frankly? I mean, I personally, if I was ill, I don't really care what nationality the individual trying to make me better is. But does it point at something bigger, which is that there are too few people here who are willing to work within our health service? And why is that? What could we do to make it more desirable for them? Yes, I know the pay argument and the conditions argument. Is it more than that? Do we need to do more to try to sell it to them? One more quick one. Elizabeth says, the social care sector workers are very poorly paid. Here we go. With dismal working conditions, they need to be treated and valued much more. Only when you become a certain age, You realise it. OK, there we go. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, we'll have more on that story that NHS England is sending a team to India to recruit doctors and nurses for the health and social care sector. I am asking if that's the best way to solve the staffing crisis, and anger is revealed as one energy company has sent its staff on a paid-for break to the Maldives whilst they're making bumper profits, and we are, of course, struggling to pay our bills. But first, here's your latest headline.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon to you. The top stories this hour on GB News. 2 serving police officers will face misconduct cases over the way they handled reports of the former Met officer Wayne Couzens' indecent exposure. The Independent Office for Police Conduct says the cases involve a Met police constable and a Kent police sergeant. Couzens, who's currently in prison for murdering Miss Everard, has admitted 3 counts of indecent exposure, one of which he committed just 4 days before her death. The Northern Ireland Assembly has failed to elect a speaker to enable the crisis-hit devolved government to resume business. The DUP again blocked the election of a speaker during a recall sitting this afternoon. The party's protesting Brexit's Northern Ireland Protocol. The White House says no group or individual has come forward to claim responsibility for the 3 most recent unidentified objects shot down over the United States. It said there's been no indication they were part of China's spy program. Meanwhile, the US military says it's recovered significant debris from the site of the first suspected Chinese spy balloon brought down off the coast of Carolina 10 days ago. Beijing has denied the object was part of their government spy system. And millions of households are facing an increase in their council tax from April. Research by the County Councils Network says 3/4 of councils in England are planning a 5% hike. That's the maximum allowed without the need for a local referendum, and would add around £100 a year to bills for average Band D properties. Those are your latest news headlines on GB News. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Don't go anywhere.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. All right, people. Well, a little bit later on, I'm going to be talking about an energy company that decided to send its staff on a big jolly up to the Maldives. And people are saying, oh, that's absolutely terrible, isn't it? We're all struggling. Yeah, OK, I do get that. But at the same time, I mean, if a company's making money, why not send your staff to the Maldives? I'd, think that's quite a nice thing. But anyway, a bit closer to home, the NHS has decided to send some of its staff to India, but supposedly not for a holiday, to help drum up a little bit of, well, recruitment for doctors and nurses in our UK health and social care sector. Now, it comes amidst a staffing crisis in the NHS. In October, a leading social care charity reported, I should say, the highest rate of vacancies in the sector. We have 165,000 unfilled posts. It is fascinating when you compare that number to the number of people who, of course, decided that they were going to walk out of there because they couldn't keep their jobs if they didn't, do what we were all told to do during the pandemic. But there we go. Accidents and emergency waiting times aren't showing any signs of improvement either. New reports suggest that more than half of patients waited more than 4 hours to be seen. So that's in your A&E, and with some waiting 10 hours or more. In fact, I've just clicked onto an article here, I did that in the break, which shows that around 18 months, so NHS strikes force thousands to wait 18 months for surgery. So that is supposedly, and this is, by the way, in The Independent, which is, quite left-leaning. They're saying NHS strikes are forcing. Nothing else, they're saying the strike. So there we go. And, of course, there's no quick stitch-up job in sight. Let's speak now to the Independent, not the Independents, just an independent statistician and former head of health analysis at the ONS. It's Jamie Jenkins. Jamie, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. First and foremost, I mean, the waiting times and the length of time people are having to wait both in A&E and for routine surgery, I mean, let's be honest with you, it is being made catastrophically worse by this strike action, isn't it?
No, Patrick, it is being made worse by the strike action. You can't divorce the fact that, if you look at some of the ambulance response times, they hit some record levels in December. That's at a time when the ambulance workers were on strike. And you look at the data that is published every single month. There's a target to get about 95% of patients. So if you go into A&E, about 95% of the patients to be seen within 4 hours. And you've got some trusts across the country where, you've got over 50% of patients are not being seen within the 4 hours. So they're way, way off these targets. You have got a postcode lottery across the country. Some areas performing much better than others. But, it's pretty bad out there at the moment, Patrick. And we do know, because they think, OK, well, take a little bit longer to see somebody. What's the problem with that? What we do know is, many research has been done over the years that shows that when you get those delays in seeing somebody, when you go to the hospital, those 4 hours could be the difference then between life and death for some people, because we do see an elevated risk of death when you have these delays in the system. The strikes won't be helping, and obviously all these vacancies. I think you just talked about going to India to try and recruit people.
Yeah.
The vacancies won't be, they won't be helping the matter as well.
No, indeed. And when I look at the care sector, just in isolation, so not people just working as frontline A&E doctors or nurses or whatever. So people in the care sector, quite often they are paid less than your average nurse or certainly your average doctor. They, I note, are not out on strike. But we do have vacancies there, and we had a lot of staff who were dismissed as a result of not getting the COVID vaccine, etc. So there was that element to it. It's also an incredibly stressful job. Do we need to go to India to entice people to work in it, or should we just sell it better to people who are already here?
Well, I think you probably need a mixture of both on this, Patrick. You're right. So we saw about 40,000 care workers lose their jobs in the pandemic because of the vaccine mandate that they had to have the vaccine to continue in the sector. But that's still only a dent in terms of these 165,000 vacancies. And what you've got to remember as well is that the problem with the social care vacancies is having an impact on the NHS as well, because many beds, you've got patients in beds, the figures over the winter have been running about 13,000 patients fit to leave hospital, but a lack of those staff in the community, in the care kind of area, means they can't be discharged. So the ambulances turn up, they can't then go out and where they've got an emergency call because they've got a patient stuck in the hospital. So what we've got here, Patrick, we've got, an aging population across the country. We know that, but it's not a new story, this. This is a population aging thing that you could have planned this 10, 20, 30 years ago. You just look at the demographics of the population. So a lack of planning's gone in. The pay is pretty relatively low, so maybe more needs to be done there. But successive governments, Patrick, have been looking at the funding of the social care sector, and they're always kicking it down the can, because when it comes to perhaps asking more and more people to pay more into it, it's not a vote winner. So that's the big problem. They need to get more people in, and they obviously are going abroad to try and get people in.
But what I don't understand is the NHS sends people over there to India to go and sell our wonderful healthcare system. Look at the benefits that you can have from working in our NHS, whatever they say they are. And then people in India just turn on the news and they see nurses on picket lines saying, I'm going to food banks. They see that patients are queuing up in ambulances outside hospitals. They read that we've got near record levels of A&E waiting times, and everyone's saying, basically, in a nutshell, I think a lot of medical professionals are actually saying this, which is, I regret the career choice that I made and now I'm striking about it. So why should someone from India come and work over here?
Now, that's a fair point, but what some of the NHS staff are saying is more to do with the fact that they're overworked because they haven't got enough staff. Now, what you'll find if you can recruit from, say, places like India, the relative wage differences for some of those people, they may come over for a short period of time. They might not come over and live here permanently. You know, you can build up quite a lot of wages in the UK because, relatively, the wages in the UK are much better than what you get in India. And I can't imagine, Patrick, as well, they're not going to be going over there, showing them that people are going on strike. But that is a critical issue that you've got. I think the big thing for me, Patrick, now, Jeremy Hunt is saying that the NHS is going to have a workforce plan. He was the Secretary of State for a long time. We haven't had a proper workforce plan. Why aren't we training enough nurses and doctors in this country, the places, so that we don't need to recruit from abroad?
Yes.
We're needing to recruit from abroad now because of a lack of planning of this government and the previous government before that.
I'm not personally, I couldn't give two hoots about the nationality of an individual who wants to try to make my health better or my grandma's health better or whatever. But my concern is that it points to a wider problem, which is that we clearly aren't being able to get people who are already living here to want to work in our NHS. And I was having a chat with some colleagues about this earlier on, actually, and they were saying, well, the NHS isn't doing a lot of great PR because even the managers in the NHS are saying that it's absolutely knackered, aren't they? But then the argument would be, well, it's not the job of NHS staff to make it seem appealing. But if one of your big problems working in the NHS is that you're telling us that you can't get enough staff and you haven't got enough staff, well, you're also, with your placards, telling people that you shouldn't work in this organisation because it will essentially ruin your life and leave you in poverty, I suppose. But there you go. Thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show, as always. That is Jamie Jenkins, independent statistician and former head of health analysis at the ONS, just reacting initially to the fact that we've got, yes, again, massive waiting times in A&E, half of people waiting more than 4 hours, some people waiting 10 hours. We're also, of course, now having to go to India to recruit. But moving on, a Sun newspaper exclusive can reveal that the energy firm Utility Warehouse flew out 100 of its agents to a £600 a night resort in the Maldives for 8 days as part of a reward for signing up new customers. So, great, I think this is brilliant. The group of representatives arrived in the Indian Ocean paradise last Tuesday and were allegedly seen handing out business cards in the sunshine, which would be weird if they all worked together, but there we go. But the jolly has caused outrage from some campaigners and a number of MPs, as millions back home are struggling with soaring bills and worry about putting the heating on. We did reach out to Utility. They haven't responded. To shed some more light on this, I am joined now by End Fuel Poverty Coalition campaigner. It's Simon Francis. Simon, look, thank you very much. What is wrong about a business that's doing well treating its employees to a nice jolly up in the Maldives?
If this was a business that was doing well and right by its customers, then sure, any business can reward its staff and incentivise its staff and ensure it can try and keep the best staff that they can possibly get. But this is a company that has got 3 weaknesses that have been identified by Ofgem in independent reports into its practices around supporting the most vulnerable people, around helping people in debt, and around customer service. It was fined £1.5 million just a couple of years ago because of its treatment of people experiencing hardship. And so it is not a company that is entirely blameless in this current crisis that we've got with energy bills.
Well, if it can't keep its staff happy, Simon, they might leave and then it'll just be like our NHS all over again. We're all overworked, we're all underpaid. The pay and working conditions are a shocker. And then here we go. We've got a company that's probably paying its employees quite well. It's decided to give them incredible working conditions, at least for a week in the Maldives. But we can't have that either, can we?
I think at the moment there has to be a level of self-reflection from these energy firms that they are making millions of pounds off the backs of people who are older, who are elderly, who have got young children in the household, who are disabled, who can't keep their homes warm. These are the same firms, not necessarily this one in particular, but this is the same industry which have been breaking into people's homes to fit more expensive prepayment meters. They are making a lot of money off not just the kind of the bills that we're paying.
I get you, Simon. They pay probably a huge amount of tax, and apparently they accepted that they hadn't done enough to help customers. They paid £1.5 million to Ofgem's voluntary fund. Can I be honest with you? Are you just jealous that some staff went to the Maldives?
No, that was a fine. That wasn't them volunteering some money to the good of the nation. They were fined for not fulfilling their licence conditions. That's the reality of that. And as we said with the other firms, they are all part of the energy system, which is causing these high prices. We know that in some instances it is difficult for energy firms to make money from the retail business. They're clearly doing all right at that side of things, but that is what is partly putting up the prices that everyone is paying. That's why the government's having to bail out households with the energy price guarantee. The whole system is broken, that it's making all this money and able to make all these excess profits, whilst there are people who are unable to keep themselves warm.
So what should they do? What should they do? Should a company who, in a particular time, benefits as a result of geopolitical factors that are way out of its control, deliberately not make as much money as it can for the sake of you and me? Do they have that obligation, really?
I think when they're running a public utility, I mean, if this was, a firm that was offering some kind of consumer good or, something like that, then, they obviously have a lot more freedom. But, people need energy to live and to work and to stay healthy. And they are profiting off that, not just because of the geopolitical situation, but because that, a lot of these firms are involved in the trading of energy. So every unit of energy goes through 8 different companies between where it's produced and getting into your meter. All of those companies making their little bit that is adding to the inaffordability of energy at the moment for most people.
And adding a huge amount to the Treasury in tax, isn't it?
Well, but then the Treasury is also having to then pay back to these same firms to subsidise the cost of energy for everyone because it's simply unaffordable. So, yes, they might be paying tax, but they're also receiving huge amounts of government subsidy because they can charge the full weight of the Ofgem price cap, which is different to what the energy price guarantee, which we pay. The government is making up the shortfall.
Yes, and is that not a political problem and not the fault of this particular energy company? I mean, if someone goes, here you go, here's a handout, you'd probably take it, wouldn't you?
It's the fault of the energy system. The system that we have in this country allows these firms to make huge amounts of profit at our expense. They're receiving money from the government as well as saying that they're giving it back at the same time. But it just shows the mess that we're in with the energy market, and the whole thing is in need of total reform.
Say it, nationalisation.
No, there's lots of ways that you could reform the energy market without resorting to nationalisation.
Would you nationalise it? Would you?
Sorry?
Would you nationalise it?
I don't think it's necessary at the moment. Like, there's ways that you can reform the market through unlinking the cost of electricity to the cost of gas and ensuring that we can benefit from cheap renewables. There's ways you can introduce a social tariff, which enables people who are more vulnerable to pay a little bit less for their energy. There's lots of different ideas out there.
All right, well, OK. A lot of people might be sounding, it all sounds a lot like rampant socialism to me, but people are well within their rights to think whatever they want. Simon, thank you very much. I must say I've enjoyed that. Thanks for coming on. Simon Francis there, who is End Fuel Poverty Coalition campaigner. Now, by the way, I do understand that people out there who are struggling, the optics of sending a load of employees to the Maldives for a massive jolly up at the price of paying energy, etc. I do understand all of that. But I also think that companies should be allowed to spend a bit of money on their staff and keep their staff happy. Anyway, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the UK spending 50 million quid of its foreign aid budget to China. That was back in 2021. Wider foreign aid chat we're having around this show now, which is, should we actually be sending any money abroad? Should charity start at home? Is there obviously a middle ground? Anyway, why are we sending foreign aid? This is from John. John says, why are we sending foreign aid to the second largest economy in the world? The amount we could invest into infrastructure and social housing would benefit so many. And look at that. We had that chap on there, didn't we, as well, from End Fuel Poverty Now. I mean, this is it. We seem to have the money to give to all and sundry all around the world for the benefit of soft power and all of this stuff. And yet we have people here who are really, really struggling. We have people here like the nurses who John goes on to mention. I always keep banging on about this, but I'm not sorry. Homeless military veterans, veterans who have catastrophic mental health problems, veterans who really, really struggle with daily life, with addiction problems and all of this stuff. And they don't seem to be getting any help, and yet we have all of the money in the world to give to absolutely every single corner of the world. Paul says, whoever comes up with this stuff to send all this aid abroad It clearly makes them feel good, but it's not their money. Well, it's your money, isn't it? And I know that people go, well, it's only 0.5% of our GDP. And yes, I know that. And I know that 50 million quid is not a huge amount in the grand scheme of things. But it is still 50 million quid that would be a huge amount for plenty of people and communities living in this country who are struggling. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Keep your views coming in. Now, moving on. It is said to be the most romantic time of the year. For Valentine's Day, it divides opinion. For some, it's a painful reminder of the difficult and fruitless search for love. For others, well, they're all too happy to buy a card and some flowers and show some affection to their nearest and dearest. So, is the 14th of February really worth celebrating? Joining me is journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, who is there now. Yes, good stuff, Sam. Sam, Valentine's Day. By the way, thanks for the card. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Good stuff, yes, no. Do you celebrate Valentine's Day? What will you be doing? Do you think it's a good thing?
Well, I mean, this is the whole thing, like, do we celebrate Valentine's Day? I mean, do you know anybody that goes, oh, I can't wait for Valentine's Day this year? It is like, I mean, I'm in a relationship, but I mean, he is not in the slightest bit romantic. I think it is something that obviously, you know, the card shops and the present shops want us to buy balloons and teddies and chocolates, la-di-da-di-da. And with the risk of sounding sexist, I think, you know, if you're in a straight relationship, the female partner would prefer to get flowers, etc., and I would say that the male partner would rather just do without it altogether. I just think, you know, unless of course he was going to get something out of it at the end of the day. But other than that, I think it's corporation gone mad.
I was worried for a second when you started speculating about what the male partner might want for Valentine's Day, but we'll leave that. We'll leave that one there. No, but seriously, come on, you miserable so-and-so, Sam. This is just an excuse. This is just an excuse to tell your partner that you love them and have a cuddle and put Love Actually on or something. You know, what's so wrong with that?
Yeah, I get that, but I mean, if you have a great relationship, you pretty much should do that all year round, I would say. I think if you're relying on Valentine's Day to be told that your partner loves you, then there's something going wrong there. But I just think, you know, I think it's a bit syrupy. I think it's quite sickly. It's definitely you know, blown up from America. I just don't like it. But then, I mean, I don't like Mother's Day or Father's Day either. I think like if you're someone, i.e. without a mother or without a father, or on Valentine's Day without a partner, what are you going to do? Be like, oh, you know, happy Valentine's Day, me, you know, or like go to like a singles night, etc. I think all it does is end up making people feel worse. Either a partner didn't recognise it enough, or they don't have a partner at all. I don't think it works out well for anybody.
Yeah, I can get what you're saying, OK? I can get what you're saying. I have this beautiful idea of your partner coming home with a load of balloons and like a meal out at a Michelin star restaurant and some flowers and a weekend away, and you've just been on national television going, I hate it. I think you'd love it then, Sam. You'd love it then.
Well, Patrick, he woke me up this morning at 9 o'clock in the morning with a homemade card, and that was it. So I mean, bless him for that. All right, but that was it.
All right, Sam, lovely stuff. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Sam Dowler there, just talking about how bleak Valentine's Day can be, apparently. You're with me, Patrick Christys. Look, I've got loads coming your way, and it's all about foreign aid. Should we start charity at home? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Now it's your weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's not particularly February-like out there. It almost feels like spring with sunny spells, very mild conditions, although towards the northwest, cloudier conditions and a few showers ahead of these weather fronts. But these weather fronts are approaching behind this air drawn up from northwest Africa. It contains some dust, actually, some Saharan dust out there, making the sunset quite vivid across some western parts of the UK. But through the evening, under the clear spells, actually a few fog patches forming in the south and southeast. A bit more patchy compared with last night. Clear spells for much of England and Wales, eastern Scotland as well. But for western Scotland and Northern Ireland, we've got cloud, wind and rain moving in. 6 or 7 Celsius in the northwest. Temperatures dipping close to 0 across central and eastern parts of the UK, with those fog patches eventually clearing through the morning on Wednesday. Then sunny spells ahead of the cloud and rain that's moving in from the west. The rain, as it crosses Scotland and Northern Ireland, peters out. It pushes into central parts of England by the afternoon, only as a spell of patchy on and off light rain. Ahead of that, 16 Celsius possible towards the southeast. Behind it, fresher conditions Some sunny spells, but also blustery showers for Scotland and some more persistent rain pushing into Northern Ireland by the end of the day. That damp weather moves into Wales and the southwest, some moderate bursts of rain associated with it as well. And by the end of the night, on Wednesday night, extensive cloud for England, Wales, southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. Outbreaks of rain, but it is going to be a mild start to Thursday. That is apart from the north of Scotland, where there will be a touch of frost and some clear spells through Thursday. The rest of the UK, well, it's dull and damp, a lot of low cloud in places and some drizzly conditions. Later Thursday, the winds really pick up, especially across northern parts of the UK. Risk of gales at first on Friday, clearing away by the weekend.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Hello, wonderful people. It's 5 o'clock. You're with me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News, with you for the next hour. So, lots to get through. Foreign aid. Do we owe the world help and money, or should charities start right here at home? This debate has been blown wide open yet again because some politicians are calling for us to stop sending foreign aid to China. We've sent them hundreds of millions of pounds. Why? When we have starving people right here and they have a space programme, etc., etc., etc. One place that we could spend more money is on our own national defence. That's before we got started on everyone else who needs some cash. Apparently, Greece and even Lithuania are spending a higher percentage of GDP on their armed forces. And our Defence Secretary is desperately rattling the can to get 11 billion quid more in funding. NATO is warning us that we don't have enough soldiers. There's reports that we don't have enough bullets, and troops are living in terrible conditions. So, should we be upping our defence budget? The NHS, they've started a recruitment drive in India. Given all the strikes and complaints about our NHS, I do wonder why anyone in their right minds would want to come and work in it, but there we go. Hopefully we can find a few people. Should we be training people who are already here, though? And is it actually unfair to other countries, like India, if we act as some kind of brain drain and swallow up all of their top medical talent? Could they make more of a difference back at home? And, of course, yes, we can't forget, can we? Unless, of course, you did forget, in which case, God rest your soul. But it is Valentine's Day. And is it just a big con? Is it just a big con to get us all spending money on chocolates, flowers, pretend to love each other? Or is it a beautiful celebration of human adoration and wonderful, tender affection? Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll do it all on foreign aid, I think. Or also, what do you receive for Valentine's Day? OK, so should we be sending out loads of money in foreign aid? And what do you receive for Valentine's Day? gbviews@gbnews.uk. An eclectic mix there. Now it's your headlines.
At just after 5 o'clock, your latest news headlines from the GB newsroom. And 2 serving police officers will face misconduct cases over the way they handled reports of former Met Officer Wayne Couzens' indecent exposure. The Independent Office for Police Conduct says the cases involve a Met Police Constable and a Kent Police Sergeant. Couzens, who's currently in prison for murdering Sarah Everard, has admitted 3 counts of indecent exposure, one of which was committed 4 days before her death. The Northern Ireland Assembly has failed to elect a speaker today to enable the crisis-hit devolved government to resume business. The DUP has vetoed the election again during a recall sitting this afternoon, and that means no further business can be conducted. It's demanding decisive action on removing economic barriers on trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Negotiations between the UK and the EU to resolve differences over the Northern Ireland Protocol are continuing. Now, millions of households are facing an increase in their council tax from April. Research by the County Councils Network says 3/4 of councils in England are planning a 5% hike. That's the maximum allowed without the need for a local referendum. And it adds around £100 a year to bills for average Band D properties. Local authorities say they have little choice but to raise the council tax rates in order to protect their local services. University staff are staging the first of 3 days of walkouts this week, threatening disruption at 150 universities. Around 70,000 members of the University of College Union are on the picket lines in an ongoing dispute over pay, pensions and working conditions. Civil servants are also striking this week, including staff at the Department for Work and Pensions and the DVLA. The White House says no group or individual has come forward to claim responsibility for the recent unidentified objects shot down over North America. It said there's been no indication they were part of China's spy program. Meanwhile, US military says it's recovered significant debris from the site of the original suspected Chinese spy balloon brought down off the coast of Carolina 10 days ago. Beijing has denied the object is part of their government spy program. NATO defence ministers are discussing support for Ukraine in Brussels, including the possible supply of fighter jets to Kyiv. It comes after the alliance warned we're already seeing a fresh Russian offensive in Ukraine, with the Kremlin claiming the NATO is more and more involved in dragging out the conflict. Meanwhile, the government's announced a national 1-minute silence be held on the 24th of February to mark the first anniversary of the invasion. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says they'll do all they can to help the war-torn country.
We need to ensure that Ukraine gets the weapons it needs to be able to retake territory, liberate the lands and win this war and prevail as a sovereign independent nation.
Detectives looking into the murder of Brianna Gay in Cheshire say they're investigating whether or not it was a hate crime. The 16-year-old, who was a transgender girl, was fatally stabbed in Culcheth last Saturday. A boy and a girl, both aged 15, have been arrested on suspicion of murder. Police have been granted an extra 30 hours to question them. And a 22-year-old man is in a critical condition after a machete attack at a pub in East London. Authorities were called to the Duke pub in Walthamstow, where 3 men were found with stab wounds inside the pub and a 4th was found nearby. 3 of the men, aged between 27 and 42, are stable in hospital. Police believe the attack was targeted, but no arrests have yet been made. UK charities and organisations are to send emergency supplies worth more than £350,000 to Turkey, 8 days after devastating earthquakes struck there and in northern Syria. At least 6 survivors have been rescued from the rubble today in Turkey, as the number of people that have died in the disaster surpasses 37,000. Earlier, Syria's president told the UN he'll open 2 more border crossings so emergency aid can enter from neighbouring Turkey for an initial 3-month period. Many Syrians have expressed anger over the lack of aid reaching opposition-controlled areas, and the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, has called man-made obstacles to be removed.
And I have an urgent message to the international community. The human suffering from this epic natural disaster should not be made even worse by man-made obstacles. Access, funding, supplies. Aid must get through from all sides to all sides through all routes without any restrictions.
And His Majesty the King has been meeting volunteers from the UK's Turkish community who've been sending aid to their home in the wake of last week's earthquakes. King Charles visited a West London charity to see the efforts of residents working to help those left homeless in Turkey and Syria. He told them how deeply sorry he was. And during his visit, the King was also given Turkish tea to taste, as well as making a brief stop at a nearby takeaway. You're with GB News, more news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, two places for us to start this particular hour. It's basically foreign aid and national defence all rolled into one. I'm just hearing right now, actually, so the Romanian Air Force has had to scramble two of its fast jets after a weather balloon-like object was detected in its airspace. Now, that's according to the country's Minister of Defence, and yes, OK, the two MiG-21 jets were scrambled to the area, southeast Romania, early this afternoon, 10 minutes after the object was sighted. Basically, it does come amid a backdrop, of course, doesn't it, of increased international insecurity. And China has now been embroiled in a diplomatic spat with the US. They've had 4 balloons there. We all know the story. We've been banging on about it for absolutely ages. But in light of China allegedly behaving like this, back here in Britain, senior Conservative MPs have called on the UK to stop sending foreign aid to China as Western security agencies discuss the threat of all of these objects. And it's opened up a much wider discussion for us, which I think is good to have every now and again, which is about foreign aid in general. We've sent China something like 50 million quid in 2021. Years previous, we've sent them 30-odd million. It's for things like, setting up business developments or, just random wishy-washy tosh about, here's some money to China, basically. What do we actually get out of it? Should China, as a massive economy with a space programme and clearly not the best will towards the Western world, it would seem, should we be sending them any money at all? But also elsewhere, should charity be starting at home? We are spending a huge amount, of course, on the small boats crisis and the migrant crisis. Some of that comes out of our foreign budget. We do also decide to send some of our money, ladies and gentlemen, to some pretty weird projects. We have sent them to in the past. I'm going to rattle off this list again. We sent £25 million for Kenyan rainmakers who watch ants and think they can predict the weather. Supposedly Nigeria, 11.3 million quid on solar panels. We did also fund their oil industry to the tune of nearly 20 million, so one cancels out the other in a big way there. The Ethiopian Spice Girls received a few million quid. I mean, why not? Everyone else is at it. And our largest recipient of foreign aid is Afghanistan, which, of course, is run, very much so, by the actual Taliban. So there you go, some of our money being sent to rather nefarious places there. Joining me now is GB News' political reporter, Olivia Rutley. Olivia, when it comes to China initially, I mean, what MP would really stand up and say, you know what, I think we should definitely now be sending money, apart from Barry Gardiner, potentially, but should be sending money to China. They do not wish us well.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be a brave MP who would stand up and actually say we should be spending more of our money on China. The argument behind Chinese aid is that there are plenty of these international projects which are aimed at, for example, reducing China's carbon footprint. And Britain, the argument is, has a duty to give to that because any changes that we make to our own carbon footprint are a drop in the ocean compared to China.
So here's a bit of money, please stop ruining the ozone layer.
Essentially, yes, and they're sort of big international projects. The other argument, which is perhaps a little bit more compelling, is that although China's GDP is very large and it's one of the wealthiest economies in the world, there is a lot of poverty in China because that GDP isn't equally distributed at all. And in rural parts of China, some of the places where the money from these projects is going to, there is real poverty. But whether the money that we're sending to China is actually reaching those people is another story. And Conservative China hawks, who are pretty active and vocal at the moment, would argue that it isn't.
We're going to do the national defence angle in a minute. We supposedly want around 11.5 billion quid added to our defence budget, because, well, frankly, we might need it, the way the world's going at the moment. But one of the other stories we've been talking about a lot is about council tax rises. Now, bear with me on this. Places like Slough, for example, are going to raise council tax, it would appear, reportedly, by around 10%. Bear in mind they're already massively in debt, supposedly anyway, and councils are woking at £1.7 billion in debt. And the British taxpayer, the poorest people out there, are being asked now to pay more money in council tax. Why on earth are we sending any of this money that could be spent in places like Slough or wherever? Why are we sending it to Afghanistan?
Well, the argument in Afghanistan is obviously that since the Taliban took over, there are parts of Afghanistan which has descended into, abject poverty, and there are women in Afghanistan who would have been able to access higher education pre-Taliban times, not able to now. And so, there is an argument that it's our international duty to help those most in need, and washing our hands of them because the Taliban has taken over isn't the right thing to do. On the other hand, you then get to that argument of some of these projects which are ostensibly independent from the Taliban government probably aren't really independent at all. So is the money getting to the right place? And that's a very delicate balance that the Department for International Trade has to look into every time it commits to a project.
It's worthwhile saying that our foreign aid budget is somewhere in the region of around 14 or 15 billion quid, I think, isn't it? And it was originally around 0.7% of our GDP. That's now around 0.5, 0.4%. There was a bit of a hoo-ha when we were talking about reducing it and then not reinstating it. So that's the lay of the land at the moment. Olivia, thank you very much. Olivia Utley there, just whizzing you through some of the initial outlines. So the basic hook for this is that should we stop giving foreign aid to countries like China? Loads of you have been in touch on this. GBviews at gbnews.uk. And an overwhelming theme of your emails, like Lynn's, for example, is if you have a space programme and a nuclear programme, we shouldn't be paying for foreign aid. And I find that quite hard to argue, especially when it comes to giving money to places like China, where even if we think we're giving it to some lovely, fluffy NGO that's going to go and hug an orphan and toss a few quid at it, well, realistically, how do we know that's not getting into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party and being used for whatever? But on the backdrop of foreign aid, there is also now this big row over our defence spending. And Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, is attempting to secure around £11 billion to bolster the little pot that we have at the moment. Joining me now is Professor Michael Clarke, former Director General of the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. I'm hugely concerned, in light of what we've just been talking about there, about things like there's no homes for military veterans, it would seem in some cases, but we do have homes for people who maybe cross in a small boat across the Channel. But in a more active serving sense now, how well prepared is our military? Do we need an extra 11.5 billion quid for it?
Well, our military can go and do things, so it can go on expeditions, it can operate, but if you have to put the whole train set together and go off and either be capable of fighting a war or look as if you're capable of fighting a war, then the answer is no, can't do it. And what Ben Wallace is talking about, and remember, this is ahead of the budget on the 15th of March, so there's quite a lot of Whitehall politics behind all of this. But unless the MOD gets those sorts of amounts of money, it can't actually plug the holes in things like support and ammunition and backup. And so we've got very good equipment, but in very, very small numbers. We've got very well-trained troops who will run out of ammunition in a week. So if the whole train set went to fight a war somewhere else in the world, it would lose.
Right, and that is obviously absolutely shocking. However, is this just another stunning lack of foresight? Because for years now, it seems as though we've been chipping away at our own military, putting a lot of our eggs in the big nuclear basket, and lo and behold, something that looks a bit like a conventional war kicks off, and we're knackered, are we?
Well, what the Minister of Defence would say is you've got to be prepared to do everything. So the MOD would argue that we have to have a nuclear deterrent because that is our ultimate guarantee that we would not be invaded. But if you want a force which the rest of the world regards as useful and can serve the interests of the country, take on the king's enemies, then you've got to pay for that as well. And what in a sense, the issue is, the government keeps making claims that we're a major force in European security. We're second only to the United States in Europe. We can do this, we can do that. And the answer is, don't keep claiming that if you can't do it. If we're not prepared to pay to do it, if the public really don't want to spend more money on defence, then stop saying that we can do things that we actually can't do.
Well, I don't think it's that, and that's what winds people like me up, Michael, which is I really don't think it's the British public here going, for example, let's put it this way. If we had a binary vote on this, which is we've got 15 billion quid as a nation, do you want to spend that in foreign aid, or do you want to spend that, especially in the current climate, on our own military? I would suspect that the military would win, Michael, don't you?
Quite likely. But the thing is, the public's never been asked. I mean, politicians assume that the public have no appetite to spend more than 2% of our GDP on defence. And in every election, defence is dealt with as a sort of fifth and sixth priority. In an election campaign of 21 days, normally half a day is spent by either party talking about defence. They talk about it and then they move on. And so nobody has actually seriously asked the public how much they think they should sacrifice for defence at a time when our neighbourhood in Europe is getting very, very dangerous.
I find that fascinating, though, isn't it? Because what is a tried and tested political tactic the world over is when an election is coming up, there's some kind of, all of a sudden, there's some kind of military crisis, someone sends the troops into somewhere, or there's a bit of military posturing, and it does well in the polls. Why? Because people do want to seem as though they've got a strong military. Can I just ask you one quick one to finish, please, Michael, if that's all right? And it is in relation a bit to, we're rolling the foreign aid and the military stuff into one a bit here, but we do have a problem with homeless military veterans. And I think the optics of hotels being used for asylum seekers whilst we've got people who are on the streets who have served this country is a bad one. Should we be maybe taking some money, in your view, out of the foreign aid budget and putting it towards our veterans?
My own view is no. The foreign aid budget is trivial compared to what we spend on everything else. And the foreign aid budget also gets us a lot of diplomatic leverage in other parts of the world. It may not be popular in certain parts of the UK, but it's very popular elsewhere. So my argument would be the foreign aid budget is actually money quite well spent because we get more for it than we give away. If we were giving 50 or 60 billion in foreign aid, I would say that's probably too much. Yeah. But we're not. It's 15 billion. Which is actually a very small billion. Remember, we're spending 100 billion on HS2. And most people say, is that really important? Does that really give us very much?
And people like me quite often sit here, as I have done today, and we have a bit of a laugh about some of the funny areas in which foreign aid has gone to, and some of them are hilarious. I mean, the Ethiopian Spice Girls, for example, that was obviously bonkers. But when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, that was something like 2 or 3 million quid. And, OK, I'd love 2 or 3 million quid. I'm sure you would as well. But a nation doesn't necessarily need it. So your view would be leave the foreign aid budget alone, stop wasting money in other areas and put that towards people like homeless military veterans, basically, yeah?
Correct. And spend the defence budget differently so that you can get more for it that you really need. Okay. Because at the moment, our war stocks, our stocks for sustaining the forces to go and do what we say they have to do are so low that nobody takes them seriously. And our allies don't take us seriously anymore. Our American allies really don't take us seriously as a military player, but we keep saying we are, but actually we're not.
OK, all right. Look, thank you very, very much. And that is Professor Michael Clark, the former Director General of the Royal United Services Institute. Great stuff, that. Fascinating, really, especially to know that our allies aren't taking us seriously. We don't want to be laughed at, do we? So maybe it's time to give us a bit more money for our defence budget. Let's discuss both foreign aid and defence spending now with Niall Gardner, the director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom. Great stuff. Of course, Thatcher was quite strong when it came to the military. What do you think Thatcher would have done when it comes to foreign aid, given the current climate that we're in at the minute?
Well, Patrick, thanks very much for having me on the show today. And I think the first thing is that Lady Thatcher would be absolutely appalled by the fact that the British government is giving money to China. This is absolutely insane. And I do hope the Foreign Secretary is going to act very quickly to end this nonsense, because giving tens of millions of pounds to Britain's biggest adversary on the world stage alongside Russia, the Chinese Communist Party, basically, this is the height of folly, and this really does have to end. And I hope that the British government's going to act very swiftly to end sending aid to China. On the issue of defence spending, Lady Thatcher's view was always that you need to increase defence spending, you need to make Britain stronger, and I'm in no doubt that she would be supporting the calls today from Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, to increase UK defence spending. I think a good source of additional funding for the UK and defence would be to move funds from the foreign aid budget, currently standing at about £11 billion, towards the defence budget. After all, Ben Wallace has called for an extra £11 billion of funding. The foreign aid budget stands at £11 billion. You could take most of that money, put it towards Britain's defence. These are dangerous times. Patrick, and Britain needs a stronger military on the world stage.
Is Britain a little bit too nice on the international circuit? We're giving 180 odd million, apparently anyway, in 2021 to Afghanistan. Well, I'm assuming a lot of that finds its way into the hands of the Taliban because they seem to control everything in Afghanistan. I would be highly sceptical that that money that we've given to some kind of very well-meaning child education charity in Afghanistan has decided to actually, at gunpoint, not hand it over to the evil rulers of that country. And so we've got us giving money to the Taliban. We've got us giving money to various different outlets in Syria. Some of it goes to NGOs, and I get all of that, but we're giving it to people like China. We know it's been widely reported that some of the money that gets sent to certain groups in Pakistan finds its way into the hands of people who I think would quite happily wipe us off the face of the earth. What are we doing? Is it madness?
I think a lot of it is, actually. A great deal of foreign aid assistance is counterproductive. It goes towards often dictatorial regimes. We simply do not have full accountability in terms of how British taxpayer pounds are actually spent. And I think that, spending huge amounts of money on foreign aid assistance is actually a monumental waste of money. You should get, the private sector to fund foreign aid assistance, invest government money in propping up and ensuring that Britain has a far stronger defence. Actually, that's where the money should be spent.
I think the British public are a generous lot. Something like 60 million quid has already been raised to the relief fund for Turkey and Syria in the aftermath of these earthquakes. So that's very generous. Well, we kind of know where that money's going, don't we? We can see it. We've dipped our hands into our pockets and done it. I resent the idea now that when I look around and see so much wrong with this country and supposedly not enough money to sort it out, especially when it comes to people who've already served this nation and lost limbs and damaged their mental health, I resent the idea that out of my pay packet, without me having any say on it whatsoever, there's money taken and given to various different groups and potentially even some, as an example I rattled off earlier, Kenyan rainmakers who watch ants to try to predict the weather. I mean, I could do without that. Thank you very much. But Niall, thank you. Niall Gardner there, the director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom. Right, we're moving on, people, because local councils are planning to hike taxes for millions come April, as councillors across England aim to plug financial holes. 133 local authorities that are charged with social care duties are increasing their rates, with 84 charging up to 5% more. So a 5% rise would add, if you're in Band D, OK, so you're in a Band D property, let's say, that's 100 quid to your average council tax payment. They're saying they've got a little choice but to do this because they're all in a financial mess. Joining me now is Vicky Price, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Thank you very much, Vicky. The council say they're in an economic mess. Is it a mess of their own making?
We have to remember that during the austerity years, when George Osborne, of course, was Chancellor of the Exchequer, council outgoings, if you like, from the government, from the central government, went down very significantly. In some cases, I think 30% below where they were before. So that's been a very, very substantial cut that they had to endure over a period of time. So that is something they're trying to make up, if you like, for now. But it's also worth remembering that it's only half of what they get, which comes from other sources. The majority, or well, certainly for a number of councils, 50% plus, comes from council tax in terms of the revenues that they get. They get something like 23% from business rates and the rest from central government. So they have to, if they want to keep the services going, with inflation, of course, increasing so significantly, raise council taxes. And what they've been allowed to do now, certainly for this forthcoming year, is raise them by 5% without having a referendum in their own local area. And so they're going ahead and doing so.
But then I look at places like Haringey. They spent 180,000 pounds, supposedly, on changing a road sign. You know, and yet here we are now, the fair people of Haringey or any other part of the UK will have a council tax increase, and they have a right to say, excuse me, you are absolutely splashing the cash here on meaningless projects and you're still pleading poverty.
I think there's always waste. There's waste in local government. There's waste in central government, as we know. I think, obviously, what we want is to have local councils that are a bit more efficient and don't spend that type of money that they don't need to spend. And you see an awful lot of work going around wherever you live, where you're wondering why on earth is this one necessarily needed. But they do have a care duty for particularly the social care side, which they have to meet. And what is happening actually is because they have to spend money on looking after people in need. What they're doing is they're cutting back quite significantly. Yes, of course, there are some examples of perhaps waste, as you mentioned, but generally what they're doing is they're cutting back on the normal services that everyone is expecting them to have. And remember, they're responsible for refuse collection, they're responsible for the parks to a considerable extent, libraries, sort of playgrounds. So there's a lot, plus the streets, of course. So there is a lot that they need to do, which requires money, of course. And we've had this inflation increase, which has been quite significant for many.
With respect, I just do not understand how places like Woking Borough Council can find themselves burdened with £1.7 billion in borrowing and a yearly debt service level of around £56 million. I mean, if you or I did anything like that, I mean, it's almost the GDP of a small country. It's Woking, for goodness sake. I mean, I would expect the streets to be paved with gold. Look, Vicky, thank you very, very much. I'm going to have to leave it there. But Vicky Price, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Apologies to people of Woking. I actually do know it. It is lovely, but you may well be shocked to know that your council apparently is, well, it's riddled with debt. There we go. You're with me, Patrick Christys on GB News. Coming up, 2 police officers, they are facing misconduct cases over the handling of reports of the indecent exposure of Wayne Couzens. He, of course, raped and murdered Sarah Everard in one of the most shocking cases that certainly I've ever reported on. Well, there's more to it, ladies and gentlemen, like you would not believe. I will have the latest on that when I'm back.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
The latest news headlines from the GB newsroom. 2 serving police officers will face misconduct cases over the way they handled reports of indecent exposure by Sarah Everard's killer. The former Met police officer Wayne Couzens is behind bars for murdering Sarah Everard and has admitted 3 counts of indecent exposure, one of which he committed just 4 days before her death. The Independent Office for Police Conduct says the new cases involve a Met police constable and a Kent police sergeant. The Northern Ireland Assembly has failed to elect a speaker to enable the crisis-hit devolved government to resume business. The DUP again blocked the election of a speaker during a recall sitting this afternoon. The party is protesting about the Northern Ireland Protocol. The White House says no group or individual has come forward to claim responsibility for the 3 recent unidentified objects shot down over the United States. It said there's been no indication they were part of China's spy program. Meanwhile, the US military says it's recovered significant debris from the site of the first suspected Chinese spy balloon brought down off the coast of South Carolina 10 days ago. Beijing has denied the object was part of their government spy system. And more than 41,000 people are now known to have died following earthquakes in southern Turkey and northern Syria. UK charities and organisations are to send emergency supplies worth more than £350,000 to Turkey 8 days after the disaster. And Syria's president has told the UN he's going to open 2 more border crossings for an initial 3-month period so emergency aid can enter from neighbouring Turkey. And the King has been meeting volunteers from the UK's Turkish community who've been sending aid to their home country in Syria in the wake of the earthquakes. King Charles has visited a West London charity to see the efforts of residents working to help those left homeless following the disaster. He told them how deeply sorry he was. Those are your latest news headlines. You are up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're at GB News. I'm back at 6.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Now, I wanted to have a bit of a chat about this because 2 police officers are facing misconduct charges over their handling of reports of indecent exposure by then-serving Met police officer Wayne Couzens. And yesterday, Couzens pleaded guilty to 3 counts of indecent exposure in Kent between November 2020 and February 2021. The Met also defended its decision to prosecute Couzens after he'd already been handed a whole life order for the rape and murder of Sarah Everard in March 2021. And that was a case, particularly, that I think we can all agree was one of the worst cases that any of us had ever really heard about. And I was amazed when you look back at this catalogue of other stuff that this guy had done, how he was allowed to go on and behave like that. And, of course, it culminated in the sad loss of life from Sarah. Joining me now is Peter Kirkham, a former Met senior investigating officer. Peter, thank you very much. And Wayne Couzens clearly is an absolute, complete and utter monstrous wrong-un. How was this guy allowed to operate in the Met?
Well, I think there are specific issues with the indecent exposures. There's a more general issue about how his behaviours weren't picked up by colleagues and things like that. But of course, if somebody is hiding what they're really up to, then it can be quite difficult to get beyond that. You might get a little bit of a sort of suggestion from time to time, but not really enough to go on. But the indecent exposures, I believe there was a car index number taken in one case that should really have led to him fairly promptly. But we've seen this for the last 12 years, really. Since the cuts to policing, they haven't got enough people to do everything properly. To be honest, sometimes you look at it and you think they haven't got enough time to do anything properly.
Well, no, but this is the thing. When I was looking at Peter, when I was looking at some of the breakdown of what happened that horrific evening in relation to Sarah Everard, the actions of Wayne Couzens there when he rented a car in his own name, basically. He was using his mobile phone for quite a lot of it, at least was able to track it. Just the manner in which he disposed of the body and him being caught on CCTV and all that stuff. Those are the actions of a man who, frankly, didn't have any faith in the police force that he worked for, clearly, because no one who was trying to cover up anything like that would have behaved so stupidly, I would suggest. And is it any wonder when you look at the fact that he's got away with flashing and goodness knows what else for a period of time as well?
Yeah, I mean, when you get away with something, it obviously gives you the feeling that you're able to get away with more, and you sort of keep pushing the boundaries. And so, yes, there would have been some of that in there somewhere. But I think when it comes to the actual murder itself, that was a massive sort of leap forward in his offending, and he probably found himself with the problem that lots of offenders in serious cases like that find themselves with, having not really thought through exactly what was going to happen next and how they were going to do things. So they try and make the best of a bad job, and mistakes are made. It's not at all unusual for that to be the case.
Just lastly on this, Peter, is there any whiff of covering stuff up? You know, oh, it's just Wayne. You know, he's only flashed someone. You know, he's one of us. Really, we'll let him off. Is there any whiff of that?
I've not heard or seen anything that suggests that to me, and I would be extremely surprised if there was.
Okay.
Police officers do not like police officers who offend with serious criminal offences, and although it's at the lower end of the scale, indecent exposure is pretty bad, and they would have been putting his name in the frame if they knew.
Yeah, I must say, I've forgotten a little bit about Wayne Couzens. I'm quite surprised that he's still with us, really, but there we go. Thank you very much, Peter. That is, of course, it's Peter... Peter Kirkham. Sorry about that, Peter Kirkham, their former Met cop. Right, OK, now moving on. We are going to be chatting about two big topics that really affect you guys throughout the course of this show. And this NHS staff are visiting India later this month in the hopes of recruiting more staff for the UK's health and social care sector. Many are wondering if the constant stories of pressure and crisis and nurses going to food banks and junior doctors having to go abroad to try to earn a crust and, oh, my gosh, everything is terrible in our crumbling cesspit of an NHS where patients lie waiting for hours and hours and hours in hospital beds. Why on earth would anyone want to come and work in our NHS? Why would they want to if the stories are so bad? Or is the reality actually that compared to, frankly, most other countries out there, our NHS is better than theirs and you do earn more money, and maybe some of the time we see people who are just regretting their career choices, and that is why some of them are out on strike. Joining me now is Simon Walls, who's a clinical lead at St Cecilia's Care Home. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. The care sector fascinates me because we're not hearing about care workers going out on strike. They were treated appallingly during the pandemic. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think, from what I can gather, on average paid a bit less than certainly some of you more other ends of the NHS. They don't seem to be going on strike. And I find it remarkable. What is it about workers in the care sector that stops them potentially from going on some of the strike action that we're seeing other people go on?
Hey, Patrick. I think for the most part, it's because it's a vocation to most of them. It's more than just a job. It's something they love doing. They love providing care. For some of them, they could earn more money if they went to B&M or if they went to some other retailers. But a lot of them decide to stay in care because it's what they want to do and it's what they enjoy doing. OK, well, there you go.
When it comes to trying to recruit staff from, in this case, India now, some people are saying, well, actually, we should be trying to do more to recruit and train people who are already here for a variety of different reasons. What's your take on that?
I think you're absolutely right, Patrick. I think the government have sort of let the nurses of this country sort of down very much in not giving them the pay that they deserve, and therefore the retention's gone down because they're moving elsewhere. They're going to other countries. They're working in other jobs where they can get paid and where they do get that recognition. Certainly in social care, ours is very much of a knock-on effect from the NHS, in that there aren't any nurses to fulfil the jobs. So at the minute, we've been recruited from overseas, which takes a lot of sponsorship, it takes a lot of work. They need to go through exams when they get here before they even become qualified. And there's a big difference to nursing in the UK with the autonomy that we have than it is working abroad. So it's taken a lot of teaching and a lot of experienced nurses to teach them that.
Well, and the housing as well. Of course, if people come over here, they've got to live somewhere. We've got a housing crisis at the minute. You might imagine that it's quite hard to find the accommodation for certain people. Can I ask you a question that, if we're being brutally honest with each other here, is it potentially not just necessarily about pay, etc., but actually a bit about the fact that maybe some people from other countries are more inclined to do the longer hours and maybe some of the dirtier elements of the job, and maybe people who've been brought up here with the niceties and the pleasantries and, you know, they've had an iPhone and whatever creature comforts from the age of 4 or 5 years old. Maybe they just, and I mean this is the best one in the world, don't fancy going and wiping someone's backside.
That's only a very small part of the job, Patrick. But I understand what you mean. I think a lot of youngsters today, a lot of people will actually stipulate on their jobs, I'll take anything but don't let me into care or don't let me do care. I don't understand why. It's kind of the youth of today. But we have got some excellent young carers and we're trying to utilise them in a sort of publicity campaign to try and get younger carers to come in and to do what is a very satisfying job, albeit not very well paid, unfortunately, this minute in time.
No, indeed. And Simon, you are clearly very, very passionate about what you do. And you speak, I can just tell by looking at you when you talk about it, you've said numerous times during this words like vocation and a satisfying job, and you clearly get a huge amount of reward out of it. And would you want to maybe try to sell that to people? I mean, because all of the stuff on programmes like this and this channel and other channels, it's all negative stuff about the NHS and about working in the public sector. I mean, good grief, I think you'd have to go further than India to try and entice someone over at the minute. You have to go to Mars, for goodness sake. Can you do a job of selling it to some people, please?
I think people find it really difficult to sort of, when it's a bit like when you said it's who would want to wipe somebody's backside. But like I said, that's a very small part of the job. And the rest of the job, we treat them like family. It's almost like going to another home from your home. We all get there, we all work together like a family, we all get on. They go and spend a lot of quality time with the people that we're looking after, and it means so much to them. And that satisfaction that you can get from the people that are the reason that we're here and doing what we do now can get the care that they want and care that they need. I mean, these people, well, a little while ago, had gone through 2 world wars and whatever else they've been through, just so that we could be British.
Yeah, look, I could listen to you all day. Simon, thank you very, very much. And it is a pleasure to see someone like yourself talking so passionately about what they do and do for others. Simon Walls there, clinical lead at St Cecilia's Care Home. Fascinating that. Look, you're with me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News. Coming up, as the diplomatic row over the suspected Chinese spy balloon continues, some MPs, let me condense this for you, OK? We're going to have a whopping great big discussion about foreign aid, whether or not we should be sending money abroad or keeping it right here. Are people needy enough over here? Should charity start at home, or should we be sending tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds to places like the Taliban and China? When I come back, we'll talk about all of that.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. you've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Faro.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
All right, people. Right, so we all know, OK, about what's been going on with the old Chinese stuff and America shooting down UFOs and all of that, OK? Well, the latest incident has taken place in Romania, apparently, because jets have been scrambled to nurse their way towards something that looks suspiciously like it might be another product of China, made in China, as they all say. But realistically, it's opened up now a massive discussion about foreign aid, specifically us sending foreign aid to China. We've sent them around 50 million quid in 2021. We've sent them loads before that as well. And it's for wishy-washy things like to improve development in the country or economic development and all of this. China is a massive economic, political and military powerhouse. It's got a space programme. It's clearly got enough money to do things like satellites and, well, spy balloons and goodness knows what else. And it's spending a huge amount of its GDP, a huge amount, on its own military. So why are we, you, everyone we know, the taxpayer, spending money, hard-earned cash, on money for China? And we're giving money over there to maybe even NGOs and non-governmental organisations, as they're called. But realistically, as long as the CCP is in charge in China and Xi Jinping is there, then we all know whose back pocket it's going into. Why are we doing that? Why are we sending money to Afghanistan, for example? Because the Taliban are in charge there. 180-odd billion quid going to the Taliban. Million, I should say. Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society, joins me now. Thank you very, very much. Should charity start more at home, do you think?
Well, I think we've already had cuts in the last few years to the overseas aid budget, which made sense given what you've just said, that charity does need to begin at home, and we had a financial crisis that needed dealing with. I don't think we should stop foreign aid completely, but clearly the idea that we should be supplying money to China at any level is ridiculous, as you pointed out. This is, after all, an economic superpower and is finding plenty of money to spend on bad outcomes. And indeed, other countries we should be monitoring very carefully, whether these are democracies, dictatorships, anything like that. And in reality, I thought that when we had the Ficado department created, the idea was to marry more our development goals with our foreign policy goals as well.
Can we not have a pretty straightforward system where we look at it and go, have you got a nuclear programme? Have you got a space programme? All right, we're not going to send you any of our cash.
Yep, I think that's a perfectly acceptable position to take. If you're spending money on advanced military or even if it's civilian functions along those lines, why on earth should we be sending you money for humanitarian purposes? Spend your military money on humanitarian purposes instead.
And it's important to note, because a lot of people have been getting in touch saying, well, hang on a minute, we've got all this money going in foreign aid and we're spending loads of money every single day on the Channel migrant crisis. I mean, we are spending loads of money on that, but a proportion of that, a good chunk of it, is actually coming from our foreign aid budget. I find it bizarre, though, that we've even got homeless military veterans and we've got people struggling between heating and eating, and the justification that we can have for sending 180 million quid or whatever to Afghanistan, or South Africa's received quite a lot as well, when we have got people right here who need the money. Do you think, Dr. Allen, that it is starting to look a little bit like we've got the money for everyone else, but not our own?
No, I wouldn't go that far, Patrick. Now, I'm quite clear that we should be spending money in a more sensible way on overseas aid, but there is a value to spending it. And let's just remind everyone what that value is. The value of spending overseas aid is to make sure that you can contain crises in other countries and stop refugee movements out of those countries into other places, including our own. The purpose is if you have a famine or something similar or a natural disaster, you want to be assisting development or helping economic growth in other countries, because realistically, if we look at the arc of development over the course of the coming century, if we don't improve conditions in said countries, then people will increasingly be mobile and come here. So we're both doing a moral thing by helping people, but it's also in our national self-interest, because it means that you're going to improve prosperity in other places and keep migrants from coming here when they wouldn't need to be doing so. So I think we've got to get that clear. That's the point. But we mustn't be wasting money on countries that don't need our help and are misusing their own budget for military space, other purposes that we wouldn't agree with.
Yeah, indeed. Dr. Allen, look, thank you very, very much. Always a pleasure to have you on the show and have your insight there. Dr. Allen Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. And, yeah, absolutely. I think we can all agree there are some incredibly worthy places that need to see our foreign aid. There are some incredibly worthy causes, OK? But at the same time, when you're looking at places that are flying people or objects to the moon or outer space, and they've got nuclear programmes and all of that, and you think, why on earth is sending us money? And on top of that as well, it's not just that, it's the people who actively wish us harm. So if you're sending money to places like the Taliban or people of various different areas of Pakistan, where they tend to as well obviously then go on and support terror groups, etc., it's not a great look for us. Up next, though, is Jubes & Co., and right here in the studio with me is Michelle Dewberry. Michelle, fantastic. Yes, OK. Oh, gosh, you're looking very, very Valentine's Day themed, can I say?
Yes, I've got my special Valentine's Day dress on, red. I always wear red, though, to be fair, but today I thought, you know what, I'll go full red. Everything is red, Patrick, everything. Happy Valentine's Day to you.
Happy Valentine's Day. I got a mystery card, so one of our viewers sent me a mystery card.
Did they?
But, yeah, exactly, yeah, I'm quite keen to find out who that's actually from. So if it is you, why don't you send an email and leave your name, because you did the card. What's coming up on your show, Michelle?
Never mind what's coming up on my show. Why has no one sent me a Valentine's Day card? And yet Patrick's got one. What is going on?
Well,
I'm not happy about this. Are you making this up, Patrick? Has someone actually sent you a Valentine's Day card?
I'm not. I've got it in my bag. I should have brought it out as a prop, but I think the missus might have got angry. Anyway, Michelle, we haven't even got time now to find out what's coming up. People are going to have to tune in.
What's coming up is Britain's best debate programme. That's what's coming up, Patrick.
Oh, lovely stuff. All right, Michelle Dewberry's coming your way. All right, look, thank you very much, everybody. I'll be back again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Peace out. See you in a bit.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's not particularly February-like out there. It almost feels like spring with sunny spells, very mild conditions, although towards the northwest, cloudier conditions and a few showers ahead of these weather fronts. But these weather fronts are approaching behind this air drawn up from northwest Africa. It contains some dust, actually, some Saharan dust out there, making the sunset quite vivid across some western parts of the UK. But through the evening, under the clear spells, actually a few fog patches forming in the south and southeast. A bit more patchy compared with last night. Clear spells for much of England and Wales, eastern Scotland as well, but for western Scotland and Northern Ireland, we've got cloud, wind and rain moving in. 6 or 7 Celsius in the northwest. Temperatures dipping close to 0 across central and eastern parts of the UK, with those fog patches eventually clearing through the morning on Wednesday. Then sunny spells ahead of the cloud and rain that's moving in from the west. The rain, as it crosses Scotland and Northern Ireland, peters out. It pushes into central parts of England by the afternoon, only as a spell of patchy on and off light rain. Ahead of that, 16 Celsius possible towards the southeast. Behind it, fresher conditions. Some sunny spells, but also blustery showers for Scotland, and some more persistent rain pushing into Northern Ireland by the end of the day. That damp weather moves into Wales and the southwest, some moderate bursts of rain associated with it as well. And by the end of the night, on Wednesday night, extensive cloud for England, Wales, southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. Outbreaks of rain but it is going to be a mild start to Thursday. That is apart from the north of Scotland, where there will be a touch of frost and some clear spells through Thursday. The rest of the UK, well, it's dull and damp, a lot of low cloud in places and some drizzly conditions. Later Thursday, the winds really pick up, especially across northern parts of the UK. Risk of gales at first on Friday, clearing away by the weekend.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story